The $2,000 phone shattered under his calloused hand like ice under a hammer. In the frozen silence of the executive conference room, every eye locked onto the janitor, the invisible man who'd just destroyed the CEO's property without flinching. But it wasn't the broken screen that stole the breath from Victoria Langford's lungs. It was what slid out from behind the shattered case, a worn military dog tag she'd seen in photographs her entire life. The one her father wore the day he died, saving strangers in a desert, half a world away. "That's impossible," she whispered. Marcus Hale met her stare with eyes that held storms she'd never weathered. "Your father asked me to give you a message, but you weren't ready to hear it." If you want to discover what message could make a CEO's world crumble and why a janitor held the key to a legacy she never understood, stay with me until the very end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Langford Tower, like accusations no one wanted to hear. 43 stories above the Seattle streets, the building rose like a glass monument to everything Victoria Langford believed she'd earned: power, prestige, and a name that opened doors before she even reached them. Inside, the polished marble floors reflected fluorescent perfection. Every surface gleamed, every corner maintained the kind of sterile excellence that whispered money without ever having to shout. And moving through those pristine halls like a ghost no one noticed was Marcus Hale, pushing his cleaning cart with the steady rhythm of a man who'd learned long ago that invisibility was sometimes the greatest armor. He was 42, though the lines around his eyes suggested harder years than the number implied. Broad-shouldered beneath his gray uniform, he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of discipline, the kind forged not in gyms, but in places where wasted energy could cost lives. His hands were scarred, knuckles that had known impact, fingers that had learned precision under pressure. But in the Langford Tower, those hands held mops and squeegees, and nobody looked twice. Nobody except the little girl whose drawing currently lived folded in his shirt pocket. "Daddy's a superhero," the crayon letters declared above a stick figure holding what might have been a broom or possibly a sword. At 7 years old, Maya Hale saw her father the way children did, with eyes that hadn't yet learned that the world measured worth in titles and bank accounts rather than bedtime stories and promises kept. Marcus had learned that lesson differently, in a place where rank meant survival, and a man's worth showed itself when the bullets started flying. But that was another life. Another version of himself that he'd folded away like his daughter's drawing. Something precious and private, not meant for the fluorescent judgment of corporate towers. "Mr. Hale." The voice cut through his thoughts with the precision of a scalpel. Marcus turned to find Jennifer Park, the head of HR, approaching with the kind of careful smile people wore when they needed something, but didn't want to admit it. "Yes, ma'am?" "Ms. Langford needs the executive conference room prepared for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Full setup, chairs arranged theater style, presentation screen calibrated, and she specifically requested that the windows be absolutely spotless. It's an important memorial committee meeting." Jennifer's smile tightened. She's quite particular about these things. "Of course. I'll take care of it." "And Mr. Hale?" Jennifer lowered her voice slightly. "Please use the service elevator. Ms. Langford prefers that maintenance staff remain unobtrusive during business hours." Unobtrusive, the polite corporate word for invisible. "Understood." Jennifer nodded and clicked away on heels that cost more than Marcus made in a week, leaving him alone again with his cart and his thoughts. He didn't bristle at the dismissal. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Maya depending on him, not with rent due, and her asthma medication costing what it did. Pride was expensive. Survival was practical. He made his way to the service elevator, the one tucked behind an unmarked door that employees pretended didn't exist, and rode it down to the basement supply room. The fluorescent lights there flickered with a tired buzz that felt almost companionable. This was his domain, the world beneath the world, where the machinery that kept the tower running hummed in honest mechanical labor. Marcus gathered what he needed: microfiber cloths, glass cleaner, the specialized solution for the hardwood conference table. He worked with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned that details mattered, that small things overlooked became big problems later. It was a lesson the military had beaten into him, one that civilian life had only reinforced. His phone buzzed, a text from Rosa, his neighbor who watched Maya after school. She's asking about the museum trip on Saturday. Still happening? Marcus felt the familiar weight in his chest. The constant calculation of hours worked against dollars, earned against promises made to a little girl who deserved more than he could give. The Museum of Flight had an exhibit on military aviation. Maya had been circling the date on their kitchen calendar for weeks, adding stars and exclamation points until the square looked like a constellation of hope. Yes, tell her it's a date. He could pick up an extra shift next week. The emergency fund would survive. The elevator carried him back to the executive floor. At night, with most of the staff gone, the tower took on a different character. The aggressive ambition that charged the air during business hours faded into something quieter, almost contemplative. This was when Marcus preferred to work, when he could move through the spaces without the weight of being unseen, when he could think without the constant reminder of his daughter growing up in a cramped apartment while he cleaned the offices of people who'd never learn her name. The conference room sprawled before him, all glass and chrome and expensive leather. At its head, a portrait dominated the wall. Nathaniel Langford, Victoria's father, staring out with the kind of commanding presence that survived beyond life. Marcus had never met the man in these halls, never seen him in a suit. His memories of Nathaniel Langford came from a different place, painted in desert sand and blood, where expensive educations meant nothing, and a man's character showed itself in how he acted when death came calling. Marcus set down his supplies and approached the portrait. In the dim light, he could almost see past the CEO polish to the soldier underneath. The man who'd grabbed his collar and hauled him behind cover when the ambush erupted, who'd tied a tourniquet with steady hands while mortars shook the earth, who'd looked at a scared 23-year-old private and said, "You're going home, son. That's a promise." Nathaniel had kept that promise. Marcus had made it home. Nathaniel hadn't. "Working late, I see." Marcus turned to find Victoria Langford herself standing in the doorway, and he understood immediately why Jennifer had been nervous. Victoria didn't just enter rooms. She claimed them, transformed them into her territory with nothing more than presence and expectation. At 34, she wore authority like couture, her tailored suit sharp enough to cut, her heels adding 3 inches she didn't need to look down on people. She was beautiful in the way expensive things often were, carefully maintained, perfectly presented, cold to the touch. Dark hair pulled back in a style that probably had a name Marcus didn't know. Makeup applied with precision, jewelry that whispered wealth without shouting. But it was her eyes that defined her, gray like winter storms, assessing everything with the kind of calculation that turned people into assets and obstacles. "Ms. Langford," Marcus straightened, his hands automatically moving to a neutral position at his sides. Old habits. "I'm preparing for your morning meeting." "I can see that." She moved into the room, her gaze traveling over the space with the attention of a general inspecting troops. "The windows need to be perfect. We're having photographers. This memorial committee is my father's legacy, and I won't have it cheapened by poor presentation." "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure everything meets your standards." Victoria's attention finally settled on him, really seeing him for perhaps the first time despite his months working in the building. Her expression suggested she wasn't impressed with what she saw, just another uniform, another service provider, another person whose name she'd never need to remember. "See that you do." She turned toward the portrait of her father, and something shifted in her posture. A softening so brief Marcus almost missed it. "My father built this company from nothing. Integrity, vision, tireless work. That was his legacy. This memorial will honor that. It will remind people what true leadership looks like." Marcus said nothing. There were things he could have said, truths he carried that would crack her certainty like dropped china. But silence had served him well for 8 years. Silence kept Maya fed and housed. Silence was survival. "Tell me something," Victoria continued, still studying the portrait. "Did you know my father? Before, I mean, when he was alive." The question landed like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus felt the weight of the dog tag in his locker downstairs, the worn metal that had hung around Nathaniel's neck through 3 deployments, the message he'd been entrusted with, the promise he'd made to a dying man. "I knew of him, ma'am. Everyone did." It wasn't a lie exactly, just not the truth. Victoria nodded, satisfied with the answer she'd expected. He was extraordinary, brilliant businessman, devoted father, pillar of the community. There'll never be another like him. No, ma'am. I don't suppose they will. She glanced at her watch, something Swiss and expensive that cost more than Marcus's car. I have an early morning. Lock up when you're finished, and remember, perfect windows. The photographers arrive at 7:30. I won't disappoint you. Victoria paused at the doorway, looking back with an expression that suggested she was calculating whether to say something more. Whatever it was, died unspoken. She left in a cloud of expensive perfume and unexamined certainty, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm that faded down the corridor. Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He returned to his work, spraying and wiping, removing every trace of the day's fingerprints and smudges. The city glittered beyond the glass, a million lights marking a million lives, each one carrying weight and history that people like Victoria would never bother to learn. His phone buzzed again. Maya this time, the text written in her careful 7-year-old spelling. Daddy, are you coming home soon? I miss you. Soon, baby girl. Sleep tight. I love you. Love you to the moon and back. Marcus smiled at the phrase, their ritual, the promise they exchanged every night. To the moon and back. It had started when she was 4, when she'd asked how much he loved her, and he'd tried to find words big enough. She'd settled on the moon as the farthest thing she could imagine, and it had stuck. He worked through the night with steady focus, cleaning not just what would be seen, but what wouldn't, the corners, the baseboards, the places people like Victoria never looked. It was how his father had taught him to work, back when they'd lived in the projects on the south side, and his dad had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Do it right, his father would say, even when nobody's watching, especially then. That's when character shows. His father had died when Marcus was 17, massive heart attack, dropped dead at 49 after a life spent breaking his back for wages that never quite stretched far enough. Marcus had joined the army 6 weeks later, looking for stability and purpose, and a way to honor the man who'd taught him that dignity wasn't found in paychecks, but in how you carried yourself when the world told you that you didn't matter. The army had given him structure, brothers, and a sense of worth that had nothing to do with the poverty he'd escaped. It had also given him nightmares, scars that didn't show on x-rays, and a day in the desert that had ended with him holding Nathaniel Langford while the man bled out from shrapnel that should have torn through Marcus instead. Promise me, Nathaniel had gasped, his grip on Marcus's arm desperate despite the life draining from him. My daughter, when she's ready, tell her the truth about everything. Tell her what matters. The tag. Keep it safe. Give it to her when she'll understand. Marcus had promised, had taken the dog tag that Nathaniel pulled from his own neck with shaking fingers, had listened to the message meant only for Victoria, words that grew fainter as Nathaniel's breathing turned ragged and then silent. 8 years. That's how long Marcus had carried that promise. 8 years of watching from the margins, waiting for the right moment, trying to determine when a woman who'd never known struggle would be ready to hear truths that would break her carefully constructed world. Tonight wasn't that moment. Maybe tomorrow wouldn't be either. But the day was coming. Marcus could feel it approaching like distant thunder, the kind that warned of storms you couldn't outrun. Dawn broke over Seattle in shades of amber and rose, painting the tower in colors it never earned. Marcus finished his work at 6:30. Every window flawless, every chair precisely aligned, every detail perfect, because that's what he'd been asked to deliver. He returned his supplies to the basement, changed out of his uniform, and took the bus home to the cramped 2-bedroom apartment where Maya would be starting to wake, reaching for him before remembering that he worked nights now, that his schedule had shifted to take advantage of the differential pay that meant an extra $100 a week. Rosa met him at the door, her weathered face kind with understanding. She was 63, a widow who'd lost her husband to the same heart disease that had claimed Marcus's father. She watched Maya for minimum wage and home-cooked meals, and never asked questions about the shadows under Marcus's eyes, or the careful way he budgeted everything down to the dollar. She's still sleeping, Rosa whispered. I'll come back at 3 for pickup. You rest. Thank you, Rosa. I don't know what we'd do without you. Families take care of each other, even the families we choose. Marcus slipped into the apartment quietly. It wasn't much: secondhand furniture, walls that needed paint, plumbing that protested in the mornings. But it was clean, safe, and filled with evidence of Maya's presence. Her drawings covered the refrigerator like a gallery. Her books stacked on the coffee table in careful piles organized by favorite characters. Her laughter, even in memory, made the small space feel bigger than any tower. He looked in on her, found her tangled in blankets printed with cartoon characters, her dark curls wild against the pillow. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's smile, her mother's fierce heart. Lena had died when Maya was 3, cancer moving with the kind of ruthless speed that gave them no time to prepare, no space to say proper goodbyes. In the end, it had been just Marcus and Maya, learning to be a family of 2, figuring out how to carry grief without letting it crush the future. "I'm trying, baby girl," he whispered to his sleeping daughter. "I'm trying to give you better." He collapsed onto the couch, still wearing his shoes, too tired to make it to his own bed. Sleep took him quickly, dragging him down into dreams that mixed memory with nightmare. Desert heat and breaking glass, Nathaniel's voice, and Victoria's cold assessment, promises made and promises kept echoing in a space where past and present refused to stay separate. The memorial committee meeting started precisely at 8. Marcus wasn't there to see it, but he heard about it later from Jennifer, who seemed to need someone to vent to about the stress of managing Victoria's exacting standards. "She was magnificent," Jennifer said during their brief encounter in the basement supply room, commanding the room, laying out the vision. "She wants something grand, a public monument, a scholarship fund, a documentary, something that will cement Nathaniel Langford's legacy in the city's consciousness." Marcus restocked his cart, saying nothing. "Between you and me," Jennifer continued, lowering her voice, "I think she's overcompensating. They weren't close, you know. Her father worked all the time, and after her mother passed, Victoria practically raised herself. Now she's trying to honor a man she barely knew. It's sad, really." "Maybe she's trying to know him now," Marcus offered quietly. "Better late than not at all." Jennifer tilted her head, surprised. "That's actually quite insightful. You're deeper than you seem, Mr. Hale." "Most people are, if anyone bothers to look." He left before the conversation could continue, uncomfortable with the attention. He had work to do, floors to clean on the lower levels, bathrooms to service. The afternoon stretched ahead with its familiar rhythm, invisible labor that kept the tower running while people like Victoria shaped the world in boardrooms 40 stories above. At 2 o'clock, his phone rang. The school. "Mr. Hale? This is Principal Morrison. Maya had an incident today, an asthma attack during PE. She's fine now, but we had to use her emergency inhaler. We wanted to let you know." Marcus's heart clenched. "I'll pick her up early." "That's not necessary. She's back in class, breathing normally, but you might want to check in with her doctor about adjusting her medication. The attacks have been more frequent lately." More frequent meant more expensive. The prescription cost $300 a month, even with insurance. An adjustment might mean a different medication, a different price point, a different calculation in the budget that was already stretched thinner than it should be. "I'll make an appointment. Thank you for calling." He stood in the basement, surrounded by cleaning supplies and industrial machinery, feeling the weight of choices that shouldn't have to be choices. Maya's health, or the electric bill. Her medication, or his pride. The emergency fund, or the museum trip she'd been dreaming about. His father's voice echoed in memory. "Do what you have to do to take care of your own. The world won't respect you for it, but your family will remember." Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a text to his supervisor. "Any extra shifts available this week?" The response came quickly. "Friday overnight, building inspection prep, time and a half." "I'll take it." He'd been planning to take Maya to her favorite playground Friday after school, had promised her they'd get ice cream and spend the whole evening together. She'd understand. She always did. That was the problem. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to be so understanding about her father's absence. Shouldn't have to learn so young that love sometimes looked like sacrifice and presence, sometimes meant working extra hours to pay for the medicine that kept her breathing. The afternoon dissolved into routine. Marcus cleaned offices where young professionals complained about their 6-figure salaries being insufficient. He emptied trash cans full of catered lunches that cost more than his weekly grocery budget. He polished conference tables where people made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever considering the human cost of their efficiency metrics. And through it all, he remained invisible. The quiet man in the gray uniform. The janitor nobody noticed. The ghost who kept their world running while they pretended he didn't exist. Victoria stood at the head of the conference table, studying the renderings spread before her. The memorial committee had presented 12 different concepts, each trying to capture her father's legacy in stone and steel and public grandeur. Too subtle, she said, dismissing the first option. My father wasn't subtle. He was transformative. Too modern, she said of the second. He valued tradition, foundations, lasting impact. One by one, she rejected them. Too small, too derivative, too focused on corporate success rather than personal character. The committee members exchanged glances, their frustration carefully masked. This was the fourth meeting, and Victoria had approved nothing. Ms. Langford, ventured Robert Castellan, the architect who'd flown in from New York specifically for this project, perhaps if you could articulate more specifically what you're looking for, we could better capture your vision. Victoria's gray eyes went cold. I'm looking for something worthy of my father, something that communicates the magnitude of what he built, who he was, the standards he represented. Is that specific enough, Mr. Castellan? Of course. Forgive me. The problem, Victoria continued, her voice sharp with frustration she rarely allowed herself to show, is that none of you knew him. You're designing based on his business biography, his public persona. But that wasn't who he was. He was... She trailed off, realizing she didn't know how to finish that sentence. Who had her father been, really? A figure in a suit who occasionally appeared at her boarding school events? A voice on the phone calling from airport lounges and hotel rooms? A portrait on a wall surrounded by accolades that testified to professional success but said nothing about the man behind the achievements? He was everything, she finished lamely. He deserves everything. The meeting ended without resolution. Victoria dismissed the committee with instructions to present new concepts in 2 weeks, then remained alone in the conference room, staring at her father's portrait as if it might offer answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Her phone buzzed, her assistant, David, with her schedule. Reminder, 4 p.m. meeting with the CFO regarding Q2 projections. 6 p.m. cocktail reception at the Sheraton for the United Way campaign. 8 p.m. reservation at Canlis with the Steinberg Group. Victoria sighed. Another evening of networking, performance, maintaining the image of the woman who had it all figured out. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to simply stop, to admit that she was building monuments to a man she'd never really known, trying to honor a relationship that had existed more in theory than reality. But stopping wasn't an option. The Langford name meant something. Her father had built an empire. She would build a legacy. That's what daughters did when they couldn't say I love you in person. They said it in bronze plaques and scholarship endowments and public monuments that would outlast grief. She gathered her materials and headed for the elevator. In the hallway, she passed the janitor, Marcus something, she thought his name was, pushing his cart with quiet efficiency. He nodded respectfully. She barely registered his presence. Why would she? He was nobody. Just another member of the support staff, easily replaced, functionally invisible. He cleaned the spaces where important people did important work. That was the natural order of things. If Marcus noticed her dismissal, he gave no sign. He simply continued his work, steady and methodical, a man who'd learned long ago that some truths weren't worth speaking until the audience was ready to hear them. Friday night came with the weight of exhausted necessity. Marcus kissed Maya goodbye at 6 o'clock, his heart heavy with her brave smile. It's okay, Daddy. We can go to the playground next week instead. Promise. To the moon and back? To the moon and back, baby girl. He worked through the night, preparing the building for a weekend inspection that would determine insurance rates and code compliance. The work was tedious, demanding attention to details that most people never considered: fire extinguisher pressure, emergency lighting functionality, stairwell signage visibility. At 2 a.m, the building silent except for the mechanical hum of climate control, Marcus found himself once again in the executive conference room. The portrait of Nathaniel Langford watched him with painted eyes that held more truth than anyone realized. Marcus pulled the dog tag from his pocket. He'd started carrying it with him lately, a subconscious preparation for something he couldn't name. The metal was warm from his body heat, the engraved letters worn but still legible. Nathaniel's name, his service number, his blood type. The practical information of military life, distilled to what mattered when everything went to hell. "When is she ready?" Marcus asked the portrait quietly. "When does she get to know who you really were?" The painted figure offered no answers. But somewhere in the building's sleeping silence, Marcus felt time shifting, felt the moment approaching when silence would no longer serve, when the truth would demand its voice regardless of the cost. He tucked the dog tag away and returned to his work. The inspection wouldn't wait. Maya's medicine wouldn't pay for itself. And Victoria Langford would continue building monuments to a man she'd never understood until the day came when understanding could no longer be postponed. That day was coming. Marcus could feel it in his bones, in the way small coincidences were accumulating into larger patterns, in the way Victoria's frustration with the memorial committee suggested a hunger for truth she didn't know she was craving. When it arrived, nothing would be the same. Not for Victoria, with her cold certainty and expensive illusions. Not for Marcus, with his quiet dignity and carried secrets. Not for the carefully maintained fiction that some lives mattered more than others simply because they played out on higher floors of glass towers. The storm was building, and when it finally broke, the rain would wash away more than just fingerprints on executive windows. It would wash away the lies people told themselves about worth, about legacy, about who deserved to be seen and who could remain safely invisible in the corners of other people's lives. Marcus finished his inspection checklist at dawn. Every item checked, every detail addressed, every standard met. Perfect work performed in perfect solitude, witnessed by no one, recognized by no one. Exactly the way he'd learned to survive. But survival was getting harder, and silence was growing heavier, and the promise he'd made to a dying man was demanding resolution. Soon, very soon now. The truth would have its day. The weekend passed in the strange, suspended time that single parents learn to navigate. Hours measured in loads of laundry, grocery store trips calculated to the penny, and the precious stolen moments when Maya's laughter made the cramped apartment feel like a palace. Marcus took her to the Museum of Flight on Saturday as promised, watching her face light up at the vintage aircraft suspended from the ceiling like mechanical birds frozen mid-flight. "That one," she said, pointing to a Huey helicopter. "That's like the ones you flew in, right, Daddy?" "Rode in, baby. I didn't fly them. But yes, just like that." She pressed her nose against the railing, studying the machine with the intense focus she brought to everything that mattered to her. "Were you scared?" Marcus considered lying, decided against it. "Sometimes, but I had good people with me. That made the difference." "Like a team?" "Exactly like a team." She took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with the absolute trust that both humbled and terrified him. "I'm glad you came home safe. Some people don't, right?" "No, baby, some people don't." They moved through the exhibits in comfortable silence after that, Maya absorbing everything with wide eyes, while Marcus carried the weight of memories she was still too young to understand. By the time they left, the sun was setting in shades of purple and gold, and Maya was half asleep against his shoulder on the bus ride home, her breath warm against his neck, her trust absolute. "Love you to the moon and back," she mumbled. "To the moon and back, baby girl." Monday arrived with the gray insistence of Seattle autumn, rain drumming against windows, while the city woke to another week of corporate ambition and practiced indifference. Marcus returned to his night shift, slipping back into the rhythm of invisible labor that kept the Langford Tower running while its inhabitants focused on things they considered important. But something had shifted. He felt it in the air, in the way small coincidences were accumulating into larger patterns. Victoria's memorial committee meetings had become more frequent, her frustration more visible. She stayed late now, long after the other executives had left, sitting alone in the conference room staring at renderings and proposals that never quite captured whatever she was searching for. Marcus observed it all from his peripheral existence, mopping floors and emptying trash while the CEO wrestled with questions she couldn't articulate. He understood her struggle more than she could know. How did you honor someone you'd never really understood? How did you build a monument to a relationship that existed more in obligation than intimacy? On Tuesday evening, he was cleaning the executive washroom when he heard voices in the hallway. Victoria and someone Marcus didn't recognize, their conversation floating through the partially open door. "You're pushing too hard," the man said. His voice carried the kind of casual authority that suggested long familiarity. "This memorial project is consuming you, Vic. Your father wouldn't want that." "Don't tell me what my father would want, Robert." Victoria's tone could have cut glass. "You didn't know him." "Neither did you, really. That's what this is about, isn't it? You're trying to construct a relationship in bronze and marble because you never had one in life." The silence that followed vibrated with fury. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. "Get out. And don't come back to this building unless it's with designs that actually understand what I'm asking for." Victoria, out. Now. Footsteps retreated quickly, expensive shoes clicking in urgent rhythm. Marcus remained motionless in the washroom, barely breathing, hoping Victoria would leave before discovering she'd been overheard. But instead he heard something unexpected, a sound so raw and human that it didn't seem to belong to the Ice Queen CEO. She was crying, not the delicate tears of someone who knew how to cry prettily, but the gasping, ugly sobs of someone who'd been holding back too long and finally broken. Marcus stood frozen, mop in hand, trapped between the instinct to offer comfort and the knowledge that his comfort would be unwelcome. He was the janitor. She was the CEO. The gulf between them was measured in more than money or education. It was the fundamental distance between people who were seen and people who existed only in service. The crying stopped as abruptly as it had started. Marcus heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath, the deliberate steadying that suggested a woman pulling her armor back into place. Her heels clicked toward the conference room, the door closing with a firm finality that meant she wanted privacy. Marcus finished his work quickly and quietly, disappearing back into the invisible spaces where people like him belonged. But the sound of Victoria's grief stayed with him, a reminder that pain didn't care about tax brackets or corner offices, that loss was the great equalizer, even when people refused to admit it. The week progressed with mounting tension. Victoria's frustration leaked into every interaction, her usual cold professionalism fraying at the edges. Staff members whispered in break rooms about her increasingly impossible demands, her rejection of every proposal, her obsessive attention to a project that seemed to satisfy no criteria except ones she couldn't articulate. Jennifer caught Marcus in the supply room on Thursday morning, her expression troubled. "I'm worried about her," Jennifer admitted, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "She's not sleeping, barely eating, just working on this Memorial Day and night like it's the only thing keeping her alive. Yesterday, she snapped at the entire executive team over a quarterly report that was 0.3% off projection. That's not like her." "Grief makes people act in strange ways," Marcus offered. "It's been 8 years since Nathaniel died. This isn't fresh grief. It's something else. Something unresolved." Jennifer sighed. "Between you and me, I think she's finally realizing she never really knew her father, and now it's too late to fix that. So she's trying to construct him from other people's memories and public records. It's heartbreaking." Marcus said nothing, but the dog tag in his locker felt suddenly heavier, the message he carried more urgent. How long did you wait before delivering truth that someone needed but wasn't ready to hear? How did you measure readiness when the person in question had built their entire identity on comfortable fictions? That night, Marcus was cleaning the executive floor when he found Victoria still in her office at midnight. The lights of Seattle spread below her like a circuit board of human ambition, each window representing someone's dream or desperation. She sat at her desk surrounded by photographs. Nathaniel at corporate events, at charity galas, at ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings. The public face of a man whose private life remained a mystery to his own daughter. Marcus knocked softly on the open door. Victoria looked up, her face drawn with exhaustion that expensive concealer could no longer hide. "What is it?" Her voice lacked its usual sharp edge, worn down by too many late nights and unanswered questions. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Ms. Langford. I just wanted to check if you needed anything before I locked up this floor." She looked at him properly for perhaps the second time since he'd started working in the building. Really looked, her gray eyes focusing on him as if he might suddenly become substantial enough to matter. Do you have family, Mr. Hale? Marcus Hale? Yes, ma'am. A daughter. And your wife? She passed away 4 years ago. Something flickered in Victoria's expression, recognition, perhaps, of pain that transcended social boundaries. I'm sorry, that must be difficult. Raising a child alone. We manage. She's the best thing in my life. Victoria's gaze returned to the photographs scattered across her desk. My father was always working, building this company, securing our future, making sure the Langford name meant something. I understood, even as a child. Sacrifice in service of something larger. Legacy over presence. Marcus recognized the script she was reciting, the justification she'd told herself for years to make sense of a childhood spent in boarding schools and summer camps while her father built an empire. He'd heard similar words from soldiers who'd missed birthdays and holidays, convincing themselves that the mission mattered more than the moment, that their children would understand someday. Some did. Most didn't. And the ones who claimed understanding often carried wounds that never quite healed. I'm sure he loved you very much, Marcus said carefully. Love. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. What does that even mean? He provided everything, the best schools, every opportunity, financial security that most people only dream about. Isn't that love? Isn't sacrifice in service of someone's future the highest form of caring? Marcus thought about Maya, about the way she lit up when he walked through the door, about the bedtime stories and goodnight kisses that cost nothing but time. He thought about Rosa's words, families take care of each other, not through money or position or legacy, but through presence, through showing up, through being there when it mattered. I think, he said slowly, that love shows itself in lots of ways, and sometimes the things we think demonstrate love aren't the things the other person needed. Victoria's eyes sharpened. That's surprisingly philosophical for a janitor. The comment landed like a slap, casual cruelty dressed up as observation. Marcus felt the sting but showed nothing. He'd learned long ago how to absorb insults from people who'd never learned that education and wisdom weren't synonyms, that expensive degrees didn't grant licenses for condescension. I apologize, Ms. Langford. I overstepped. I'll finish my work and let you get back to yours. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Wait. I'm sorry, that was uncalled for. She rubbed her eyes, smudging mascara she'd probably spent time perfecting that morning. I'm just tired. And frustrated. I'm trying to honor my father with this memorial, but I can't seem to articulate what I want because I don't know who he really was. Every story people tell me is about his business acumen or his professional integrity. Nobody talks about him as a person, as a father, as a man who existed outside of quarterly earnings and board meetings. Maybe, Marcus suggested carefully, you need to talk to people who knew him in different contexts, not just colleagues and business associates. Like who? His golf buddies? His country club friends? Victoria's laugh was bitter. They knew the same version of him everyone did. The public Nathaniel Langford. The performance. Marcus almost told her then, almost revealed that he'd known her father in his last moments, when all performance stripped away and only truth remained. Almost pulled out the dog tag and delivered the message that had been burning in his pocket for 8 years. But something held him back, an instinct honed through years of combat and civilian survival that told him the moment still wasn't right, that truth delivered too soon would be rejected, that Victoria needed to arrive at readiness rather than having it forced upon her. I'm sure you'll figure it out, he said instead. Good night, Ms. Langford. Good night, Marcus. The use of his first name surprised him. It was the first time she'd acknowledged him as something more than a function, a person rather than a position. Small progress, maybe? Or maybe just exhaustion lowering her usual walls. Marcus returned to his cart and continued his rounds, but his mind stayed in that office with the grieving CEO, surrounded by photographs of a stranger who happened to be her father. He understood her pain more than she could know. He'd carried similar questions about his own father, wondering if working 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads was love, or if it was just what survival looked like when you were born on the wrong side of prosperity. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya's school, forwarded by Rosa. Parent-teacher conference requested for next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Maya is doing well academically, but Mrs. Patterson has some concerns she'd like to discuss. Marcus stared at the message, calculating schedules and coverage. Tuesday afternoon meant asking for time off, which meant lost wages, which meant the budget would be tight. But Maya came first. Always. I'll be there. Thank you for letting me know. He finished his shift at dawn, the building slowly coming alive around him as early rising executives arrived to attack another day of corporate warfare. Marcus slipped out through the service entrance, invisible as always, carrying his secrets and his promises into the gray Seattle morning. The weekend brought rain that hammered the apartment windows and kept Maya inside, restless with unexpended energy. They built a fort from couch cushions and blankets, created an elaborate fantasy world where dragons needed rescuing and princesses knew kung fu. Marcus played along with the kind of complete commitment that made Maya's imagination real, because these moments were what mattered, not the paycheck or the position, but the presence. "Daddy?" Maya said during a break in their adventure, her face serious in the way children got when wrestling with big thoughts. "Why do some people have so much money and some people don't?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Lots of reasons, baby. Sometimes it's about the family you're born into. Sometimes it's about opportunities. Sometimes it's just luck. Is it fair? No, it's not fair. Then why don't people fix it? Because the people who have the power to fix it usually benefit from how things are, and it's hard to change a system when you're comfortable inside it." Maya frowned, processing this. "When I grow up, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make sure everyone has enough." Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I believe you will, baby girl. You've got a big heart and a strong spirit. You're going to do amazing things." "Because you taught me," she said with the absolute certainty that only 7-year-olds possessed. "You're the best teacher in the world." If only, Marcus thought. If only the lessons he could teach her were enough. How to be kind despite hardship. How to maintain dignity without security. How to value people regardless of their position. But the world didn't reward those lessons with college funds or financial stability. The world rewarded connections and privilege and being born to the right parents in the right zip code. Still, he'd give her everything he could, everything that mattered. Tuesday came with the dreaded parent-teacher conference. Marcus left work early, losing 4 hours of wages, and arrived at Maya's school in his civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt that he kept clean for occasions like this. The elementary school was cheerful in that aggressive way schools tried to be, with bright murals and inspirational posters telling children they could be anything they wanted, carefully avoiding the asterisk that said, "if you have the resources and support systems to make it possible." Mrs. Patterson was young, idealistic, the kind of teacher who still believed she could make a difference. Marcus liked her immediately. "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. Maya is a bright, engaged student. Her reading is above grade level, her math skills are solid, and her creativity is remarkable." "But," Marcus prompted, hearing the unspoken concern, "but I'm worried about her. She's very mature for her age, too mature, maybe. She takes on a lot of emotional responsibility. When other children are upset, she's the one comforting them. When there's conflict, she's the mediator. It's admirable, but it's also—" "She's 7, Marcus finished. "She should be allowed to be 7. "Exactly." Mrs. Patterson's expression was compassionate. "I get the sense that Maya worries about things beyond her years, about money, about your well-being, about being good enough so she doesn't add to your burden. Does that resonate?" It did, more than Marcus wanted to admit. He thought about Maya's brave smile when he had to cancel plans for extra shifts, the way she never asked for things, even when he could see her wanting them, the careful way she monitored his tiredness and tried to be easier, quieter, less demanding. "She's been through a lot," Marcus said quietly, "losing her mother, watching me struggle sometimes. I try to shield her, but kids see more than we think. She loves you enormously. That's clear. And you're doing a wonderful job in difficult circumstances." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "But I want to make sure Maya has space to be a child, to be silly, to be selfish in age-appropriate ways, to not worry about adult problems. Is there anything the school can do to support you both?" Marcus appreciated the question even as he knew there were no easy answers. What he needed was time. The luxury of not working night shifts, of being present for breakfast and homework help, of not calculating every expense down to the dollar. What he needed was security. What he needed was a world where single fathers who cleaned office buildings could give their brilliant daughters the same opportunities as children born to corner offices. "We're managing," he said, "but I'll talk to her. Make sure she knows she's allowed to just be a kid." "Thank you." "And Mr. Hale? For what it's worth, Maya talks about you constantly. You're her hero. Whatever you're doing, it's working where it matters most." Marcus left the conference with a knot in his chest, the familiar weight of wanting to give more than he could provide. He picked Maya up from Rosa's apartment and took her to the playground despite the drizzle, pushing her on the swings while she laughed and demanded, "Higher, Daddy, higher." "Baby girl," he said when she finally tired, sitting beside her on the damp bench, "you know you can tell me anything, right? When you're worried or scared or need something?" "I know, Daddy." "And you don't have to take care of me. I'm the grown-up. That's my job." Maya looked at him with eyes too old for her face. "But who takes care of you?" The question hit him like shrapnel, tearing through the armor he tried to maintain. "I take care of myself. That's what adults do." "But that's not fair. Everyone needs someone." "I have you. That's all I need." She leaned against him, small and trusting. "Mrs. Patterson said I'm going to do great things when I grow up. I told her I learned everything from you." "You're going to do better than great," Marcus promised. "You're going to change the world." "Can you come to my classroom next month? We're doing a thing where parents talk about their jobs. I want to tell everyone about you." Marcus's throat tightened. "Of course, baby. I'd be honored." "Even though you're just a janitor?" The casual cruelty of the word, just delivered without malice because she'd absorbed it from a world that assigned value based on job titles. Marcus chose his words carefully. "I'm not just anything. I'm a facilities maintenance technician who keeps important buildings running safely. I'm a father who loves you more than anything in the world. I'm a man who shows up and does his job with dignity. Those things matter, Maya. Don't ever let anyone tell you they don't." "Okay, Daddy?" She paused, then added, "I think you're the most important person in the whole world. And you're mine. To the moon and back." "To the moon and back!" They went home and made dinner together. Spaghetti from the box, sauce from the jar, garlic bread from the freezer. A meal that cost less than $5 but felt like a feast because they were together, because Maya's laughter filled the small apartment, because these moments were what life was actually about, even when the world insisted otherwise. That night, after Maya was asleep, Marcus sat on the couch with his laptop, searching job listings he'd looked at 100 times. Security positions that required certifications he couldn't afford. Management roles that wanted degrees he'd never finished. Entry-level positions in tech companies that paid more than he made but required skills he'd never had time to learn. The gap between where he was and where he needed to be felt impossibly wide. But he kept searching, kept hoping, kept believing that somehow he'd find the break they needed, because giving up wasn't an option when a 7-year-old believed you were a hero. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Hale? This is Victoria Langford. Jennifer provided your contact information. I'm sorry to reach out after hours, but I have an unusual request. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow at 7 p.m.? I'd like to discuss something related to my father's memorial. I'll compensate you for your time, of course." Marcus stared at the message, feeling the weight of destiny shifting. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for, approaching faster than he'd expected. Whatever Victoria wanted to discuss, it was creating an opening for the truth he'd been carrying. He typed his response carefully. "Of course, Ms. Langford. I'll be there." The reply came quickly. "Thank you. Conference room, 7th floor. And Marcus? Come as yourself, not in uniform. This isn't official business." Marcus set down his phone, his heart pounding. In his locker at work, the dog tag waited. The message waited. The truth that would change everything waited. Tomorrow night, the silence would end. Tomorrow night, Victoria Langford would learn who her father really was. And nothing, not the tower, not the carefully maintained distance between their worlds, not the comfortable fiction of invisibility, would ever be the same again. Marcus stood outside the Langford Tower at 6:45, watching the last of the day shift employees filter out into the Seattle evening. The sky hung low and gray, threatening rain that hadn't quite decided to fall. He'd left Maya with Rosa, telling her he had an important meeting, but not explaining why his hands were shaking or why he'd checked the dog tag in his pocket 17 times during the bus ride over. The weight of 8 years pressed against his chest. 8 years of watching from the margins, waiting for this moment without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Now it was here, and Marcus felt the peculiar terror that came with knowing you were about to detonate a bomb in someone's carefully constructed life. He rode the elevator to the 7th floor, his civilian clothes feeling strange after so many nights in the gray uniform that made him invisible. Jeans, a clean button-down shirt, the leather jacket he'd bought secondhand but took care of like it was armor. Dressed like this, he was just a man. Not a janitor, not a veteran, not a ghost haunting the corners of other people's success. Just Marcus Hale, carrying a truth that was about to change everything. The conference room door stood open. Victoria sat at the head of the table, but she'd transformed the space. The formal chairs had been pushed aside. She'd brought in comfortable seating from somewhere, a couch, 2 armchairs arranged in a conversational triangle. On the table sat coffee in a carafe, real mugs instead of disposable cups, and what looked like sandwiches from the expensive deli 2 blocks over. She stood when he entered, and Marcus saw immediately that she'd changed too. Not just her clothes, though the jeans and cashmere sweater were a far cry from her usual corporate armor, but something in her posture, her expression. The walls were still there, but they'd developed cracks. "Marcus, thank you for coming." She gestured to the seating. "Please, sit. I wasn't sure if you'd eaten, so I brought food. Help yourself." Marcus settled into one of the armchairs, hyper-aware of every movement, every choice. This wasn't his world. The casual intimacy of the setup felt like a trap, even though he knew it wasn't. Victoria was trying to create space for connection, but the distance between their lives couldn't be bridged with comfortable furniture and expensive sandwiches. "I appreciate you meeting with me outside your normal hours," Victoria continued, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "And I want to compensate you for your time. What's your hourly rate?" "Ms. Langford, that's not necessary." "It absolutely is. Your time is valuable. What you charge is your business." Marcus named his hourly wage, watching her face carefully. She didn't flinch, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, of just how little he earned for the work he did. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen several times. "I'm sending you payment for 3 hours. That should cover your time tonight and your travel." She looked up. "And please, call me Victoria. If we're going to have an honest conversation, we can dispense with the corporate formalities." "Then you should know I go by Marcus, not Mr. Hale." "Marcus." She tested his name like it was unfamiliar on her tongue. "Okay, Marcus it is." They sat in silence for a moment, the coffee cooling between them, the sandwiches untouched. Victoria seemed to be wrestling with how to begin, her usual commanding presence dissolving into something more human and uncertain. "I asked you here because you said something the other night that's been haunting me," she finally said, "about love showing itself in different ways, and how sometimes what we think demonstrates love isn't what the other person needed. That hit me harder than you probably intended." Marcus said nothing, letting her work through whatever revelation she was approaching. "I've been trying to build this memorial to my father for months now," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've hired the best architects, the most talented designers. I've rejected dozens of proposals because none of them feel right. And I finally realized why. I'm trying to memorialize a man I didn't actually know. Every story people tell me about Nathaniel Langford is about the CEO, the businessman, the public figure. Nobody talks about him as a person, as a father, as someone who existed outside the company he built." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window where the city lights were beginning to glow against the gathering dark. "I've been lying to myself, telling myself that his absence was sacrifice, that his constant work was love, expressed through providing security and opportunity. But the truth is simpler and uglier. My father chose his company over his family, over me. He was never home, never at school events, never present for the moments that actually mattered. And now he's dead, and I can't ask him why. I can't demand answers. I can't tell him that I needed a father more than I needed a trust fund." The grief in her voice was raw enough to fill the room. Marcus felt it settle in his chest, familiar and heavy. He'd heard similar words from soldiers who'd missed their children's childhoods, from men who'd believed the mission justified the absence and only understood the cost when it was too late to fix. "So I asked you here," Victoria said, turning to face him, "because you're a single father. You work nights to support your daughter. You're making sacrifices too. And I want to understand something. How do you do it? How do you make your child feel loved when circumstances force you to be absent so much? How do you balance survival and presence? Because my father failed at that, and I'm trying to understand why." Marcus absorbed the question, feeling the weight of what she was really asking. She wasn't looking for parenting advice. She was looking for absolution, some explanation that would transform her father's neglect into noble sacrifice, that would let her rewrite their history into something she could memorialize without drowning in resentment. He couldn't give her that, but he could give her truth. "I don't always succeed," Marcus said quietly. "My daughter is 7 years old, and she's already too mature for her age. She worries about money. She tries to make herself smaller, easier, less demanding because she sees how hard I work and doesn't want to add to my burden. Her teacher pulled me in for a conference because Maya spends so much time taking care of other people that she forgets to just be a kid." Victoria's expression shifted, recognition dawning. "That sounds like you?" Marcus finished. "Probably. Children who grow up feeling like they need to earn love or justify their existence learn to make themselves useful. They become the mediator, the caretaker, the one who never asks for anything because asking feels like failing." "My mother died when I was 12, Victoria said softly. "After that, it was just me and my father. Except it wasn't, really. It was just me. He threw himself into work, and I learned that the way to get his attention was to be perfect. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect daughter who never needed anything or caused problems. I thought I was helping him, thought I was showing love by not being a burden. And he thought he was showing love by building you a financial empire. Maybe. Or maybe he was just uncomfortable with grief and parenthood and found it easier to pour himself into something he understood, quarterly earnings and market shares and business strategies." Victoria returned to her seat, her shoulders sagging. "I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know, and now I never will." Marcus reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the dog tag. This was the moment. This was why they were here, why 8 years had led to this conversation in this room. But now that the moment had arrived, he found himself hesitating, understanding with sudden clarity that what he was about to do would wound her before it could heal her. "Victoria," he said carefully, "can I ask why you invited me here specifically? You could have had this conversation with any number of people. Why the janitor?" She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "Because the other night you saw me crying in the hallway. You could have pretended you didn't notice, could have stayed hidden in the washroom until I left. But I saw your shadow in the doorway. You were there, and you chose not to intrude, but you also didn't just disappear. You gave me space while making sure I wasn't completely alone. That's a kind of respect I'm not used to." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe she was more ready than he'd thought. Maybe the walls had come down enough. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something about your father. But before I do, I need you to understand that I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to give you what he wanted you to have." Victoria's expression sharpened, wariness creeping back in. "What are you talking about?" Marcus pulled out the dog tag, let it dangle from his fingers in the fluorescent light. The metal caught the glow, spinning slowly, the engraved letters clear and undeniable. Victoria's face went white. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That was buried with him. I saw it in the casket. I watched them close the lid." "That was a replacement," Marcus said gently. "This is the original. Your father gave it to me 8 years ago in a desert outside Kandahar. He pulled it off his own neck about 3 minutes before he died." The room seemed to contract, all the air sucking out through some invisible drain. Victoria stood frozen, her eyes locked on the dog tag, her mouth working without sound. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You knew him. In the war." "Yes." "You were there when he died." "Yes." "And you never said anything. You've been working in this building for months, cleaning my office, watching me struggle with this memorial, And you never once mentioned that you knew him, that you were with him at the end." Her voice was rising now, shock transforming into fury. "What kind of person does that? What kind of sick game have you been playing?" Marcus absorbed her anger without flinching. He'd expected this, had played out this moment in his head countless times. Anger was easier than grief. Rage was simpler than the complicated truth he was about to deliver. "I was waiting," he said calmly. "Your father made me promise something. He told me to give you this tag and deliver a message, but only when you were ready to hear it. Not when you were comfortable or happy or settled, but when you were ready to actually listen. When you'd done enough searching that truth would land instead of bouncing off the armor you wear." "You don't get to decide when I'm ready for anything." Victoria's hands were shaking, her composure completely shattered. "That's my father's dog tag. Those are his words. You had no right to keep them from me." "He gave me that right. With his last breath, he gave me that right." Marcus stood, holding the dog tag out to her. "But you're right about one thing. The time for waiting is over. Whether you're ready or not, you need to hear what he said." Victoria snatched the dog tag from his hand, clutching it so hard her knuckles went white. Tears streamed down her face, 8 years of grief and anger and unresolved longing pouring out in ugly, gasping sobs. Marcus wanted to comfort her, to offer the kind of consolation humans gave each other in moments of breaking. But she needed to break. The walls she'd built wouldn't come down any other way. He waited, standing still while she fell apart, giving her the space to be human and messy and destroyed. Finally, her breathing steadied. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, streaking mascara, not caring how she looked. When she met his eyes again, the Ice Queen CEO was gone. What remained was just a woman who'd lost her father without ever really knowing him. "Tell me," she said hoarsely. "Tell me everything." Marcus returned to his seat, and the words he'd been carrying for 8 years finally found their voice. It was October 7th, 2017. We were providing security for a convoy delivering medical supplies to a remote village. "Your father wasn't supposed to be there. He was visiting as part of some corporate goodwill project, embedding with our unit for a few days to write a report about private sector support for military operations. Most of the suits who came through stayed at the base, had dinner with the officers, took some photos, and went home with stories to tell at board meetings. Your father insisted on going into the field, said he needed to see the real work to write anything honest." Victoria was perfectly still, the dog tag pressed against her chest like she could absorb her father's essence through the metal. "We were about 40 minutes out from base when the ambush hit," Marcus continued. "IED took out the lead vehicle. Small arms fire from 3 positions. It was coordinated, professional. We returned fire, called for air support, did everything by the book. But your father, he didn't have combat training, didn't know how to move under fire. I saw him freeze, saw the confusion on his face when the shooting started." Marcus's voice grew quieter, memory pulling him back to that day with sensory clarity he'd never been able to shake. "I grabbed him, pulled him behind our vehicle. He was in shock, asking questions that didn't matter. What was happening? How many hostiles? When would help arrive? I told him to stay down and stay quiet. He did. He followed orders like a soldier, even though he was scared out of his mind. The firefight lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When air support arrived and the hostiles scattered, we did a damage assessment. 3 wounded from our unit, the lead vehicle destroyed. And that's when we found the second IED, hidden in a culvert about 15 feet from where your father and I were sheltered." Victoria's breath hitched. "He saw it." "He saw it," Marcus confirmed. "Saw it the same time I did. We both understood immediately what it meant. If it detonated, we were both dead. No question. That kind of device, that proximity, there's no surviving. Protocol says you report it and wait for EOD. But sometimes protocol gets people killed. Sometimes you have to make impossible choices in seconds." He paused, remembering Nathaniel's face in that moment, the fear and the calculation and the sudden startling clarity. "Your father looked at that IED, looked at me, and I saw him make a decision. He was a businessman, right? He understood risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis, the math of sacrifice." "What did he do?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "He said, 'You have family, son?' I told him yes. I didn't tell him about Maya specifically. She wasn't born yet, but I told him I had people waiting for me. People who needed me to come home. And he said, "Then you're going home. That's not negotiable." Then he started moving toward the IED. No. Victoria's denial was instinctive, rejecting the story even as she knew it was true. He was going to trigger it deliberately, Marcus said. Draw the blast away from the rest of us. Classic sacrifice play, except I couldn't let him do it. I was the soldier. I'd signed up for the possibility of dying in some desert. He was a civilian, a father, a man who'd built something that mattered. So I tackled him, knocked him down hard, probably bruised his ribs. We fought, actually fought, grappling in the dirt while our unit was screaming at us to get back. And in the middle of that fight, the IED detonated. Marcus fell silent, the memory of the blast still visceral. The sound that wasn't sound so much as pressure, the wave of force that picked them up and threw them, the ringing in his ears that lasted for days, the taste of blood and sand. Shrapnel from the explosion caught your father in the chest and abdomen, Marcus continued quietly. Missed me completely because he was on top of me when it went off. The tackle I'd meant to save him ended up putting him in the direct path of the blast. He saved my life by accident, by being in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Victoria was crying again, silent tears that tracked through the ruins of her makeup. How long did he have? Maybe 5 minutes? The medic tried, but the damage was too severe. Your father knew it. He was lucid right up until the end, aware of what was happening, making his peace with it. Marcus's throat tightened. He pulled off his dog tag, made me take it, made me promise to keep it safe, to give it to you when the time was right. And then he gave me a message. For you. What message? Victoria's hands were trembling so badly the dog tag rattled. What did he say? Marcus met her eyes, preparing to deliver words that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about her father. He said, "Tell Victoria I'm sorry. Sorry for every missed birthday, every school event I skipped, every time I chose the company over her. Tell her I was a coward. I didn't know how to be a father after her mother died, so I hid in work because that was easier than facing my grief and my inadequacy. Tell her the company doesn't matter, the money doesn't matter, the legacy doesn't matter. What matters is showing up for the people you love while you still can. Tell her I finally understood that in my last moments, and I'm sorry I learned it too late." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria sat frozen, the dog tag clutched in both hands, her father's words settling over her like snow, cold and pure and undeniable. Everything she'd built her identity around, the noble sacrifice, the devoted father who'd worked himself to exhaustion for his daughter's future, was revealed as a comfortable lie. The truth was simpler and more painful. Her father had been human, flawed, and afraid. He'd failed her, and in the end, he'd known it. "That's not the legacy you've been trying to memorialize," Marcus said gently. "You've been trying to honor the public version of your father, the CEO, the businessman, the success story. But that's not who he was asking you to remember. He wanted you to learn from his mistakes, not celebrate his achievements." Victoria's voice, when it came, was broken and raw. "Why did you wait? Why didn't you tell me this years ago? I could have. Could have what?" Marcus asked. Grieved differently? Built a different memorial? The message wasn't time-sensitive, Victoria. It was readiness-sensitive. If I'd told you this when you were still convinced your father was a saint who'd sacrificed for your benefit, you would have rejected it, called me a liar, convinced yourself I was making it up for some incomprehensible reason. You needed to arrive at this moment yourself. You needed to recognize that something was wrong with the story you'd been telling yourself. You had no right. I had every right. Your father gave me that right when he put this in my hand and made me promise to deliver his message when you could actually hear it. Not when it was convenient, but when it was true. Marcus leaned forward. And you know what the hardest part of keeping that promise has been? Watching you dismiss me. Treat me like I'm invisible. Call me just a janitor, like my work doesn't matter, like I don't matter. Because that's exactly what your father did his whole life. Dismiss the people around him, the ones who weren't valuable enough or important enough to deserve his attention. You learned that from him, Victoria. That cruelty, that coldness, that's his real legacy, and you've been perpetuating it. The words landed like physical blows. Victoria flinched, recognizing the truth she'd been avoiding. She'd become her father, not the sanitized version she'd been trying to memorialize, but the real man. Distant, dismissive, valuing people for their utility rather than their humanity. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "I don't know how to honor his memory when his memory is failure." "You don't honor his memory," Marcus said. "You honor his last wish. You learn from his mistakes. You become the person he wished he'd been instead of building monuments to the person he pretended to be." Victoria stood abruptly, pacing again, the dog tag still clutched in her hand. "The memorial committee, the project, everything I've been planning means nothing if it's built on a lie. Your father didn't want a statue or a scholarship fund named after him. He wanted you to understand what matters. Presence, connection, showing up for people while you still can. That's the legacy worth preserving." She stopped at the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The city sprawled below, indifferent to personal revelation, continuing its endless cycle of ambition and desperation. Somewhere down there, Maya was probably already asleep, dreaming dreams that didn't include missing fathers or financial calculations. The thought of his daughter steadied Marcus, reminded him why he'd finally broken his silence. "I need time," Victoria said without turning around. "I need time to process this, to figure out what it means. Take all the time you need. The message has been delivered. My promise is kept. Will you?" She turned to face him. "Will you tell me more? About him? About that day? I need to know everything. When you're ready to hear it, yes, all of it." Victoria nodded slowly, then looked down at the dog tag in her hand. "Thank you for keeping it safe, for waiting, for caring enough about a stranger's dying wish to carry it for 8 years. That's extraordinary. It's what any decent person would do." "No, it's what you would do. Most people wouldn't. Most people would have sold it on eBay or kept it as a war trophy or just thrown it away." She met his eyes. "You're not just a janitor, Marcus. Sorry I ever made you feel that way. I'm sorry for continuing my father's worst habits without even realizing it." Marcus stood, knowing the conversation had reached its natural end. Victoria needed space to break down completely, to grieve the father she'd never had and the relationship that had been lost before it could be built. That grief would be ugly and hard and necessary. He couldn't carry it for her. "For what it's worth," he said at the door, "your father died knowing he'd been wrong. That's more self-awareness than most people achieve. It doesn't undo the damage, but it means something. He saw the truth at the end. He wanted you to see it too." "Marcus?" Victoria's voice stopped him. "Your daughter, Maya. You're doing it right. Whatever you're worried about, whatever you think you're failing at, you're doing it right. She knows she matters to you. That's what my father could never figure out. How to make me feel like I mattered more than his company." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He left her there in the conference room, surrounded by comfortable furniture and expensive sandwiches and the ruins of everything she'd believed about her father and herself. The night air hit him like a blessing when he stepped outside, cool and clean after the claustrophobic intensity of the conversation. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. 8 years of carrying another man's dying words, and now the weight was gone, transferred to the person it was always meant for. He pulled out his phone and texted Rosa. "On my way home. Be there in 30 minutes. The response came immediately. "Take your time. Maya's sleeping like an angel." "You okay?" "I will be." The bus ride home felt longer than usual, the city passing outside the window in streaks of light and shadow. Marcus replayed the conversation, wondering if he'd done it right, if there was a better way to deliver truth that wounded before it healed. But there was no manual for this, no protocol. Just the messy, imperfect attempt to honor a promise made to a dying man by helping his daughter finally see him clearly. When Marcus slipped into the apartment, Rosa met him at the door with knowing eyes. "Big night?" "Bigger than I expected." "You look like you've been through a war." Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him. "Something like that." Rosa gathered her things, then paused at the door. "Whatever you did tonight, it was the right thing. I can see it on your face. The weight you've been carrying, it's lighter now." "How did you know I was carrying weight?" "Baby, I've been alive 63 years. I know what it looks like when someone's holding on to something too heavy to share. I'm glad you finally set it down. After she left, Marcus looked in on Maya. She was sprawled across her bed, blankets kicked off, one arm flung over her head in complete abandonment. The drawing of Daddy the superhero was tacked to the wall above her headboard, yellowing at the edges but still proudly displayed. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I'm trying, baby girl," he whispered. "I'm trying to be the kind of father who shows up, who's present, who makes you feel like you matter more than anything else in the world. Because you do. You absolutely do." Maya stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep. Marcus caught only 2 words, but they were enough. "Love you, Daddy." "To the moon and back, baby. Always to the moon and back." He retreated to the couch, exhaustion hitting him like a physical force. Tomorrow would bring consequences he couldn't predict. Victoria might embrace the truth or reject it. The memorial might be transformed or canceled entirely. She might fire him or promote him or simply pretend the conversation had never happened. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, Marcus could sleep without the weight of undelivered words pressing against his chest. The promise was kept. The message was delivered. Whatever happened next was Victoria's journey, not his. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. The sounds of the city, his lullaby, the knowledge of promises kept his peace. Marcus didn't hear from Victoria for 3 days. 3 days of returning to his night shifts, pushing his cart through the familiar corridors, cleaning spaces that suddenly felt charged with history and revelation. The conference room where he'd shattered her carefully constructed world remained empty, the comfortable furniture gone, returned to whatever executive office it had been borrowed from. The space looked exactly as it had before. Sterile, professional, designed for decisions rather than emotions. But everything had changed. Marcus felt it in the way Jennifer avoided his eyes during their brief encounters, in the whispered conversations that died when he entered a room, in the careful distance other staff members suddenly maintained. Word had spread somehow, not the specifics perhaps, but the sense that something significant had occurred between the janitor and the CEO, something that had shifted the invisible lines that kept their worlds separate. On the 4th day, Marcus arrived for his shift to find a message from his supervisor waiting in his locker. "Report to HR immediately. Don't punch in." His stomach dropped. This was it. The consequences he'd known might come. Victoria had had time to process, to decide how to respond to the truth he'd delivered. Apparently she'd chosen to respond by having him fired. Marcus couldn't even blame her. He'd kept crucial information from her for months, had watched her struggle without offering the answers he possessed. From her perspective, his silence must have seemed like cruelty, even if his intentions had been honorable. He made his way to Jennifer's office, rehearsing in his head how he'd explain this to Maya. How he'd tell his 7-year-old daughter that Daddy had lost his job because he'd kept a promise to a dying soldier, because he'd tried to do the right thing in an impossible situation. She'd understand, or at least she'd try to, because that's what she always did. But understanding wouldn't pay the rent or buy her asthma medication. Jennifer's expression was unreadable when he entered. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, her usual warmth replaced by something more guarded, more professional. "Marcus, please sit down." He sat, his hands resting calmly on his knees despite the storm of anxiety in his chest. Whatever was coming, he'd face it with dignity. That was all he had left. "I'll get straight to the point," Jennifer said. "Ms. Langford has requested that you be transferred to the day maintenance crew, effective immediately. The position comes with a pay increase, 15% above your current rate, and includes benefits enrollment in our executive staff healthcare plan. You'll work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, with weekends off." Marcus stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're being promoted," Jennifer said, and now her professional mask cracked into something that might have been relief or confusion, or both. "Or transferred technically, but with significant improvements to your compensation and schedule." Ms. Langford was very specific about the details. She also wanted me to inform you that your daughter will be added to the company's dependent healthcare coverage, which includes prescription medication with minimal copays. The words didn't make sense. Marcus tried to process them, to understand how a conversation that had ended with Victoria in tears and him walking out had transformed into this. Why? Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying him with open curiosity. I was hoping you could tell me. Miss Langford has been different since your meeting. Quieter, more thoughtful. She canceled the memorial committee entirely yesterday, just sent everyone home and said the project was being completely reconceived. Then she came to me with this transfer request for you, along with very specific instructions about your schedule and compensation. When I asked why, she said, and I quote, "Because I've been perpetuating my father's worst mistakes, and it ends now." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Victoria had heard him. Really heard him. The truth had landed, and instead of destroying her, it was transforming her. "When does this start?" he asked. "Today, if you're willing. Your new supervisor is Derek Chen, head of facilities management. He's expecting you at 9. I'll process the paperwork this afternoon, and the changes will be reflected in next week's paycheck." Jennifer paused, then added more quietly, "I don't know what happened between you and Ms. Langford, and it's not my business. But whatever it was, it seems to have been important for both of you." Marcus left the HR office feeling like he'd stepped into someone else's life. Day shift meant mornings with Maya, meant walking her to school, being there for breakfast, helping with homework in the evenings. The healthcare coverage meant no more anxiety about medication costs, no more calculating whether they could afford doctor visits. The pay increase meant breathing room in a budget that had been suffocating them for years. It was too much. It felt like charity, like guilt manifesting as generosity. But it was also exactly what Maya needed, what they both needed. And refusing it out of pride would only hurt his daughter, would prioritize his ego over her well-being. He called Rosa from the lobby, his voice shaking slightly. "I need to ask you a favor. Can you bring Maya here? To the tower? There's something I want to show her." Rosa heard something in his voice, didn't ask questions. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. Marcus waited in the lobby, watching the morning flow of employees arriving for work. They moved with the purposeful energy of people who belonged, who had positions and titles and the certainty of paychecks that made planning possible. Soon he'd be one of them, not an executive, not someone important, but visible, present. Part of the day shift world where people actually saw each other. Maya burst through the revolving door like a small tornado, Rosa following at a more measured pace. His daughter's face lit up when she saw him, confusion and delight mixing in her expression. "Daddy, what are you doing here? It's morning." Marcus swept her up, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "I wanted to tell you something, baby girl. Something important." "What?" Her eyes went wide with the kind of anticipation that could mean either wonderful news or terrible news, and children never knew which until the words came out. "I got a new job. Same building, same company, but different hours. I'm going to be working during the day now, which means I'll be home at night, every night. We can have dinner together. I can help with your homework. I can put you to bed and be there when you wake up." Maya's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, joy, disbelief, and then a crumpling sadness that broke Marcus's heart. "But what about your important night work?" she asked, her voice small. "The work that pays for my medicine?" And there it was, the weight she'd been carrying, the understanding that her needs cost money and her father sacrificed sleep and presence to provide them. 7 years old and already learning that love sometimes looked like absence, that caring meant working hours that kept you apart from the people who mattered most. "The new job pays more," Marcus said gently, "and it comes with better health insurance. Your medicine will cost less. Everything will cost less. We're going to be okay, Maya, better than okay." "Promise?" Her voice was so hopeful it hurt. "Promise. To the moon and back." "To the moon and back!" She threw her arms around his neck, squeezing hard enough to restrict breathing. Over her shoulder, Marcus saw Rosa smiling, her weathered face soft with vicarious joy. "This is good news," Rosa said. "Really good news. Your daddy's worked hard for this." "I know," Maya said, pulling back to look at Marcus seriously. "He's the hardest worker in the whole world. That's why he deserves good things." "Speaking of which," Marcus said, setting her down, "I need to go meet my new supervisor, but I wanted you to see where I'll be working. Wanted you to know that this is real." He walked them to the elevator. Maya's hand secure in his, chattering about all the things they could do now that he'd be home in the evenings. They could have proper dinners. They could go to the park before dark. He could come to her school events. The list went on, each item a reminder of everything they'd been missing, everything he was about to get back. At the elevator, Rosa took Maya's other hand. "We'll let you get to work. Come on, mija, let's get you to school." "Bye, Daddy. Have a good first day." Marcus watched them leave, his daughter skipping between steps, her joy infectious enough to make even the corporate lobby feel warmer. Then he turned and headed to the facilities management office, ready to meet Derek Chen and begin the next chapter of a life that had suddenly, impossibly, gotten better. Derek turned out to be a compact man in his 50s with laugh lines around his eyes and a handshake that suggested he'd worked his way up from exactly where Marcus was starting. He showed Marcus around the facilities office, introduced him to the day crew, 8 other people who maintained the building's operations, most of them older than Marcus, all of them welcoming in the way people were when they recognized their own. "Victoria was specific about wanting you on the shift," Derek said as they toured the mechanical room where the building's major systems lived. "She didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. But I want you to know, this isn't a pity job. I need good people, and your supervisor from the night crew says you're meticulous. That matters in this work. The difference between a flooded basement and a properly maintained building is attention to detail." "I understand," Marcus said. "I'm here to work, not coast." "Good. Because we've got a major HVAC overhaul starting next week, and I'm going to need everyone at full capacity." Derek paused at a bank of monitors showing various building systems. "This job isn't glamorous. Most people in this building will never know your name or recognize your face, but when you do your job right, everything works. People are comfortable, safe. That's worth something, even if nobody notices." Marcus thought about Nathaniel's last words, about showing up and being present for the things that mattered. "It's worth everything," he said. "The invisible work that keeps the world running, that's the foundation everything else stands on." Derek smiled. "You'll fit in fine here." The morning passed in training, learning the building systems, the maintenance schedules, the protocols for different types of emergencies. It was similar to his night work, but somehow different in execution. Everything happening in daylight with other people around, conversations flowing naturally instead of the isolated silence he'd grown accustomed to. At noon, Derek sent everyone to lunch. The day crew ate in a small break room tucked behind the mechanical spaces, a place that felt more like a family kitchen than a corporate facility. People shared food, told stories, laughed at jokes that had probably been recycled through dozens of lunch breaks. Marcus sat quietly, observing, slowly understanding that he'd been invited into something he hadn't realized he was missing: community. "You married, Marcus?" asked Teresa, a woman who'd been with the company for 15 years and ran the day crew's informal social calendar. "Widowed, 4 years now." "Kids?" "A daughter, 7 years old." "Day shift is going to change your life," Teresa said with the certainty of someone who'd seen it before. "I transferred from nights about 10 years ago. My son was in high school then, getting into trouble because I was never around to keep him on track. 3 months on day shift, and everything shifted. I could be present, could actually parent instead of just survive." "That's what I'm hoping for," Marcus admitted. "It'll happen. Just takes time to adjust. Your body's going to be confused for a few weeks. Spent so long working nights that sleeping normal hours is going to feel weird at first. But stick with it. It's worth it." The afternoon brought its own rhythms. Marcus worked alongside Derek, learning the maintenance routes, the problem spots in the building that required extra attention. It was physically demanding work, but Marcus had always been physically capable. The difference was doing it in daylight, with people around, feeling like part of something rather than a ghost moving through empty spaces. At 4:30, Derek pulled him aside. "Good first day? You pick things up quick. Tomorrow we'll get you started on the HVAC prep work. For now, go home. Get used to leaving when the sun's still up." Marcus clocked out, changed out of his work clothes, and stepped into the late afternoon Seattle light. The city looked different at this hour. Busier, more alive, full of people heading home to families and evening plans. He pulled out his phone and texted Rosa. "On my way to pick up Maya. Should be there by 5:30. She's been watching the clock since 3. See you soon." The bus ride felt surreal, traveling in daylight instead of pre-dawn darkness, watching the world through windows that showed life happening instead of the isolated glow of all-night convenience stores and empty streets. When he arrived at Rosa's apartment, Maya launched herself at him with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting an eternity. "You're here! You're really here! It's not even dark yet!" "I told you, baby girl. New schedule. This is how it's going to be now." They walked home together, Maya's hand in his, her chatter filling the evening air with plans and excitement. When they reached their apartment, Marcus started dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce and a salad. But cooking while Maya did her homework at the kitchen table felt like the most normal, miraculous thing he'd ever experienced. "Daddy?" Maya looked up from her math worksheet. "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course I'm happy. Why do you ask?" "Because you look different, like the weight thing Mrs. Patterson talked about in class, about how sometimes grown-ups carry invisible weight and it makes them tired. You look less tired." Marcus crossed to where she sat, knelt down so they were eye level. "I am less tired, and you know why? Because I get to be here with you. This, right now, sitting together while you do homework and I make dinner, this is what I've been working for. This is what matters." "More than money?" "So much more than money." Maya considered this seriously, then returned to her math problems. "Good. Because I'd rather have you than $1 million. Even $1 million? Even $1 billion. You're worth more." Marcus kissed the top of her head, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't articulate. This was what Nathaniel had tried to tell Victoria. This moment, this connection, this presence, it was worth more than corner offices and business empires and public monuments. It was the only currency that actually mattered, and so many people realized it too late or never realized it at all. They ate dinner together, cleaned up together, settled onto the couch for the bedtime story ritual that had been compressed into quick weekend moments for too long. Maya chose her current favorite, a book about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals, and snuggled against Marcus while he read, her breathing gradually slowing as sleep crept up on her. "Daddy?" she murmured, half asleep. "Today was the best day." "Yeah, baby girl, it really was." He carried her to bed, tucked her in with the ritual precision she required. Blankets just so, stuffed animals in their proper positions, nightlight at exactly the right angle. When he bent to kiss her forehead, she caught his hand. "Love you to the moon and back." "To the moon and back, baby. Always." Marcus returned to the living room, sinking onto the couch with the kind of exhaustion that felt earned rather than defeating. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that he immediately recognized as Victoria's. "I hope the new position is working out. I know words are inadequate, but thank you for everything. For telling me the truth even when it hurt. For keeping your promise to my father. For showing me what integrity actually looks like. I'm trying to learn from it." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, considering his response. Finally, he typed, "The position is more than I could have hoped for. You didn't have to do this, but I'm grateful. Not just for me, but for my daughter. You've given us something that money can't buy, time together. That's a gift I'll never forget." The response came quickly. "My father's message keeps echoing in my head. What matters is showing up for the people you love while you still can. I can't fix what he got wrong, but I can try not to repeat his mistakes. Starting with recognizing that how I treat people, all people, regardless of their position, reflects who I am, not who they are. That's growth." He'd be proud. I hope so. I'm canceling the grand memorial. Instead, I'm creating something smaller, more honest, something that honors who he actually was, including his failures. Because pretending he was perfect doesn't help anyone. Learning from his mistakes might. That sounds right. Will you help me? With the new memorial? You knew him at the end. You know what mattered to him. I need that perspective. Marcus considered the request. It would mean more time with Victoria, more interactions across the social divide that separated their lives. It would be complicated and probably uncomfortable, but it was also the right thing to do, helping her create something honest rather than something impressive. "Yes, I'll help. Thank you. Can we meet next week? Same conference room, same time. I'll be there." Marcus set down his phone, feeling the strange satisfaction of watching something broken begin to heal. Victoria's transformation wouldn't happen overnight. People didn't undo a lifetime of conditioning in days or weeks. But she was trying. That mattered. The willingness to recognize your own failures and work to correct them was rarer than people wanted to admit. The week unfolded with the disorienting pleasure of normal hours and regular routines. Marcus walked Maya to school every morning, relishing her chatter about upcoming tests and playground politics. He worked alongside the day crew, learning the building's quirks and earning their respect through consistent competence. He cooked dinner every night, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and felt pieces of himself that had been dormant suddenly coming back to life. On Friday evening, Maya's teacher sent home a permission slip for the parent career day Marcus had promised to attend. He filled it out immediately, checking the box that said he'd be willing to speak about his work. Maya had been reminding him about it daily, her excitement building with each reminder that Daddy would actually be there, would actually show up. "What are you going to tell them?" she asked that night, watching him sign the form. "The truth, that I help keep an important building running safely, that every job matters if you do it with care and dignity, that the work people don't notice is often the work that matters most." "That's good," Maya said seriously. "Some kids think only fancy jobs are important, but you're important even without being fancy." "Where'd you learn that?" "From you, Daddy. You taught me that." Saturday morning brought the meeting with Victoria. Marcus arranged for Rosa to watch Maya, then made his way to the tower. The building felt different on weekends, quieter, emptier, the aggressive ambition replaced by the peaceful hum of systems maintaining themselves. He found Victoria already in the conference room, but she'd transformed it again. The table was covered with photographs, documents, and what looked like personal journals. She looked up when he entered, and Marcus was struck by how different she appeared. The armor was gone. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, her face free of the makeup that usually masked her humanity. She looked younger, more vulnerable, more real. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it's your weekend. I can pay you for your time." "No," Marcus interrupted gently. "This isn't work. This is something different, something that doesn't fit into hourly rates." Victoria nodded, accepting this. She gestured to the materials spread across the table. "I've been going through my father's personal effects, things I couldn't look at after he died. Letters, journals, photographs from before he became consumed by the company. And I'm finding a person I never knew. Someone who was funny, thoughtful, uncertain. Someone who struggled." She picked up a photograph, passed it to Marcus. It showed a younger Nathaniel holding a baby Victoria, his expression equal parts terrified and amazed. "This was taken the day I was born. Look at his face. He's completely overwhelmed. My mother wrote on the back, 'Nathan convinced he's going to break her. I keep telling him babies are more durable than he thinks.'" Marcus studied this photo, seeing in Nathaniel's expression something he recognized from his own early days with Maya. Being a parent is terrifying, especially at first. You're responsible for this tiny human, and you have no idea if you're doing it right. "He never figured it out," Victoria said quietly. "Or maybe he figured it out, but it was easier to avoid than to face. After my mother died, he could have stepped up, could have been present. Instead, he buried himself in work and told himself it was for my benefit. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative, that he just didn't want to deal with parenting alone, was too painful." She pulled out a journal, opened to a page marked with a post-it note. "This entry is from 3 months after my mother's funeral. Victoria asked me today if I loved her. I said, of course, but the truth is, I don't know how to love her the way she needs." Sarah made it look easy. The emotional connection, the intuitive understanding of what our daughter needed. "I'm good at business, at strategy and execution, but a grieving 12-year-old, I'm completely lost. So I do what I know. I work. I provide. I tell myself it's enough, but her eyes tell me otherwise." Victoria's voice broke on the last sentence. Marcus gave her space, understanding that she needed to voice this, needed to externalize the pain that was reshaping her understanding of her entire childhood. "He knew," she continued. "He knew he was failing me, and he did it anyway because facing his inadequacy was harder than hiding in quarterly earnings reports. And now I look at my own life, at how I've treated people, And I see the same pattern. When things get emotional or difficult, I default to professional distance. I make it about business because business is something I understand. I've been doing exactly what he did, choosing the easier path instead of the more honest one. But you're recognizing it, Marcus said. That's the difference. Your father didn't have that realization until his final moments. You're getting it now, while you still have time to change. That's not failure. That's growth. Victoria met his eyes. How do I honor that? How do I create a memorial that acknowledges both who he was and who he failed to be? Marcus thought about it, about the monuments scattered across the city celebrating leaders and visionaries, rarely mentioning their human failures. Tell the truth. Not the sanitized version, but the complicated one. Create something that says, here was a man who built an empire but lost his daughter in the process. Here was a man who understood his failures too late, but still understood them. Learn from his mistakes so you don't have to make them yourself. That's a memorial worth building. The board will hate it, Victoria said. They want something that celebrates the Langford legacy, that makes the company look good. Admitting that our founder was a flawed human who prioritized work over family isn't great PR. Then it's a good thing you're the CEO and they work for you, not the other way around. Victoria laughed, surprised by her own amusement. That's remarkably bold for someone who's been working here for less than a week in his new position. I've learned that speaking truth is worth the risk, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. They worked through the afternoon, sorting through Nathaniel's papers, pulling out the honest moments, the vulnerable admissions, the evidence of a man who was more complicated than his public persona suggested. Victoria talked about her childhood, about the loneliness of boarding schools and empty houses, about teaching herself not to need things because needing was too painful when no one was there to meet those needs. I became who I am as a defense mechanism, she said at one point. The Ice Queen CEO who doesn't need anyone. It's armor. And it's been effective, but it's also been lonely. I have acquaintances, not friends, colleagues, not confidants. I've spent so much energy protecting myself that I forgot to actually live. It's not too late, Marcus said. You're 34, you have decades to build something different, to connect with people, to let them see you. Like I'm letting you see me right now? Exactly like that. Victoria looked down at the dog tag she now wore around her neck, hidden beneath her sweater. When you gave me this, when you told me what my father said, I was furious with you. I felt betrayed. But then I realized you'd given me a gift, the truth. Even when it hurt, even when it would have been easier to let me keep believing the comfortable lies. That's real respect. Not the performative kind I'm used to, but actual respect. Caring enough about someone to tell them hard truths. Your father did the same for me, Marcus said. In his last moments, he could have stayed silent, could have died with his illusions intact. Instead, he told the truth. He admitted his failures. He asked me to pass that honesty along to you. That took courage. I wish I could tell him I understand now, that I forgive him, that I'm trying to be better. Maybe that's what the memorial should be. Not a monument to who he was, but a promise about who you're choosing to become. Honor him by learning from his mistakes, by being present, by valuing people for their humanity rather than their utility. Victoria was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful, considering. What if we created a scholarship fund, not for business students or future CEOs, but for single parents trying to finish their education? People like you, who are working full-time and raising children and trying to build better lives despite impossible circumstances. We could call it the Nathaniel Langford Second Chances Fund, because that's what he'd want, for other people to get the chances he missed, the chance to be present, to show up, to not have to choose between providing for their families and actually being there for them. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. That would matter. That would actually change lives. Would you help me design it? You know what single parents need. What would make a real difference? Yes, I'll help. They talked details, logistics, possibilities. The conversation stretched into evening, natural and engaged, the distance between their worlds shrinking with each honest exchange. At some point, Victoria ordered dinner delivered. Not expensive sandwiches, but pizza from a place down the street, casual and unpretentious. They ate directly from the box, papers spread around them, building something meaningful from the ruins of complicated grief. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said between bites. "About your wife. How do you talk about her with your daughter? How do you keep her memory alive without making Maya sad?" "Honestly," Marcus said, "we talk about her honestly, the good parts and the hard parts. I tell Maya stories about her mother, how she laughed, what she loved, the quirky things she did. And when Maya asks why she died, I don't sugarcoat it. I tell her that sometimes people get sick and medicine can't fix them, that it's not fair but it's real, and then I hold her while she cries, and we remember together." "Does it get easier?" "No, it gets different. The grief becomes part of your landscape instead of the whole terrain. You learn to carry it. And Maya helps. She looks so much like Lena that sometimes I see my wife and my daughter smile, and it hurts and heals at the same time." Victoria nodded slowly. "I never grieved my father properly. I performed grief, black clothes, appropriate silences, the public mourning expected of me. But I never actually sat with the loss. Never let myself feel it. I was too angry, too convinced that you can't grieve someone you never really knew. You're grieving him now. That's what all of this is. You're finally letting yourself feel the loss of what you never had. That's harder in some ways than grieving what you lost. It feels like I'm mourning a stranger and a father simultaneously. The stranger he actually was, and the father he could have been. That's exactly what you're doing. And it's okay. Grief doesn't have rules. It doesn't care about timelines or appropriate behavior. It just is." They cleaned up as the city lights sparkled beyond the windows, the evening settling into comfortable quiet. At the door, Victoria hesitated. "Marcus, thank you for today, for helping me figure this out, for treating this like it matters." "It does matter. You matter. The work you're doing, trying to be better, to learn from your father's mistakes, that's some of the most important work there is. I've spent my whole life measuring worth in profits and positions. You've shown me that actual worth is something different entirely, something harder to quantify, but infinitely more valuable." Marcus smiled. "You're learning fast." "I have a good teacher." He left her there in the tower, returned home to find Maya asleep on the couch, Rosa dozing in the armchair beside her. He thanked Rosa quietly, watched her slip out into the night, then carried his daughter to her bed. She stirred slightly as he tucked her in. "Daddy?" "Right here, baby girl. Did you have a good day?" "I had a great day. We're building something important." "That's good. You're good at building things." "So are you, baby. So are you." He kissed her forehead, breathed in her strawberry scent, felt the absolute rightness of this moment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and complications. But tonight, he was present. He was home. He was exactly where he needed to be. And somewhere across the city, in a glass tower that suddenly felt less cold, Victoria Langford was learning the same lesson her father had delivered with his dying breath. Show up for the people you love while you still can. Everything else was just noise. The following week brought unexpected turbulence. News of the memorial project's cancellation leaked to the press, and suddenly Victoria found herself fielding questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The business media, always hungry for controversy involving prominent CEOs, began running stories with headlines that ranged from sympathetic to scathing. Langford heir abandons father's legacy competed with CEO questions founder's values, and the particularly brutal Victoria Langford honoring or dishonoring. Marcus watched it unfold from his new position on the day crew, overhearing conversations in break rooms and elevators. Some employees defended Victoria's decision. Others whispered about instability, questioned her judgment, wondered if the pressure of leadership was finally cracking the Ice Queen's composure. The building hummed with speculation, and Marcus felt the weight of knowing he'd catalyzed this storm. On Wednesday morning, he received a text from Victoria. "Emergency board meeting today at 2 p.m. They're demanding I explain the memorial cancellation and justify my erratic behavior. Any chance you're free? I could use a friendly face in the room." Marcus stared at the message, understanding immediately what she was asking. She wanted him there not as the janitor, not even as the day maintenance crew member, but as the person who'd known her father at the end. As a witness to truth, that the board wouldn't want to hear but needed to. I'll be there. What should I wear? Whatever you're comfortable in. This isn't about performance anymore. It's about honesty. Marcus told Derek he needed the afternoon for personal business, received an understanding nod, and went home to change. He stood in front of his closet, such as it was, trying to decide what comfortable honesty looked like when walking into a corporate boardroom. He settled on his one good pair of khakis and a button-down shirt that Maya had once told him made him look fancy, but still like daddy. When he kissed Maya goodbye that afternoon, she looked at him seriously. "Are you nervous?" "A little bit." "Why?" "Because I'm going to tell some important people some truths they might not want to hear." Maya considered this with the gravity she brought to all important matters. "Mrs. Patterson says telling the truth is always right, even when it's hard." "Mrs. Patterson is a smart lady." "Will the important people be mad at you?" "Maybe, but being mad doesn't make them right." Maya hugged him tightly. "You're brave, Daddy, braver than anyone." "I learned from the bravest person I know," Marcus said, squeezing her back. "You." He arrived at the tower at 1:30, his stomach tight with anticipation. Jennifer met him in the lobby, her expression troubled. "Marcus, Ms. Langford asked me to escort you to the boardroom. But I should warn you, it's tense up there. The board is not happy, and some of them are pushing hard for Victoria to reconsider. Or step down." "Step down?" "She's the CEO." "She's the CEO, but the board has significant power, especially when they're united. And right now they're united in thinking Victoria is making a terrible mistake." Jennifer hesitated, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, I think she's doing the right thing. But courage doesn't always protect you from consequences." The boardroom occupied the top floor, a space designed to intimidate with its panoramic views and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. 12 board members were already seated when Marcus entered, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her posture straight but her face showing strain. When she saw Marcus, something in her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady. "Everyone, this is Marcus Hale. He's a member of our facilities management team, and more importantly, he's the person who was with my father when he died." The room went silent. Several board members leaned forward, their hostility shifting to confusion and interest. "I don't understand," said Richard Castellan, the silver-haired man who seemed to be leading the opposition. "What does the janitor have to do with Nathaniel's memorial?" Marcus felt the familiar sting of dismissal but kept his expression neutral. Victoria's jaw tightened. "Marcus isn't the janitor, Richard. He's a veteran who served with my father in Afghanistan. He was there during the ambush that killed him. And he's been carrying a message from my father for 8 years, waiting for me to be ready to hear it." Victoria's eyes swept the table. "That message is why I canceled the memorial project, because I was building a monument to a man who didn't exist, a sanitized version of my father that honored his public image while ignoring his private failures." "Failures?" Another board member, Margaret Chen, spoke up. "Nathaniel built this company from nothing. He created thousands of jobs, generated billions in value, established a legacy that will endure for generations. That's not failure. That's extraordinary success." "In business, yes," Victoria agreed. "But in the things that actually mattered, he failed spectacularly. He was an absent father who chose quarterly earnings over his daughter's school plays. He worked himself to exhaustion, avoiding the hard work of actual parenting. And in his final moments, he understood that. He knew that the empire he'd built meant nothing compared to the relationship he'd neglected." "This is ridiculous," Richard said, his voice sharp. "You're dismantling your father's legacy based on some deathbed confession? People say all sorts of things when they're dying, emotional, irrational things. That doesn't make them true or relevant to how we should memorialize him." "It's not irrational," Marcus said quietly, his first words since entering the room. All eyes turned to him. "It's the clearest thing your founder ever said, because when you're dying, the performance stops, the pretending ends. You see what actually mattered, and you understand with perfect clarity what you got wrong. And you think you understood Nathaniel Langford based on a few minutes of battlefield drama?" Richard's tone dripped with condescension. "You're a maintenance worker, What could you possibly know about the complexities of building a company, raising a daughter, balancing competing responsibilities? I know what it's like to be a single father working impossible hours to provide for my child, Marcus said, his voice level but firm. I know what it's like to miss bedtime stories because you're cleaning offices at midnight. I know what it looks like when a 7-year-old tries not to ask for things because she doesn't want to add to your burden. And I know that no amount of financial security compensates for absence. No trust fund replaces presence. That's a lovely sentiment, Richard said, but it's also naive. Nathaniel provided his daughter with opportunities most people only dream about. The best schools, every advantage, financial security that will last her lifetime. That's love expressed through action. No, Victoria said, her voice cutting through Richard's certainty. That's guilt expressed through money. Love requires presence. It requires showing up, being uncomfortable, doing the hard emotional work of actually connecting with another human being. My father understood that at the end. He sent me a message through Marcus asking me to learn from his mistakes, not to celebrate his accomplishments. So your solution is to what? Apologize for your father's success? Create some sort of memorial to his failures? Margaret's expression was somewhere between concerned and appalled. Do you understand what that would do to the company's reputation, to the Langford name? I understand perfectly, Victoria said. And I don't care, because the Langford name, as it currently exists, is built on a lie. A carefully maintained fiction that success in business equals success in life, that financial achievement compensates for human failure. I'm done perpetuating that lie. The room erupted in overlapping voices, board members arguing with Victoria and each other, the carefully maintained professional courtesy dissolving into something rawer and more desperate. Marcus watched Victoria hold her ground, saw her refusing to be swayed by pressure or intimidation. She'd found something in the past weeks, not just truth about her father, but truth about herself. And she wasn't willing to trade that clarity for comfort or approval. Enough! Richard's voice cut through the chaos. The room settled into tense silence. Victoria, I'm going to be direct. The board has serious concerns about your judgment. This memorial cancellation is symptomatic of larger issues: erratic decision-making, emotional instability, a concerning tendency to prioritize personal feelings over company interests. We're prepared to call for a vote of no confidence if you continue down this path. Victoria didn't flinch. Then call it, because I'm not changing course. I'm creating a memorial that honors who my father actually was, flaws and all. And I'm establishing the Nathaniel Langford Second Chances Fund, a scholarship program for single parents trying to complete their education while raising children and working full-time. It will be fully funded by my personal inheritance, and it will launch next quarter regardless of what this board decides. You'd rather lose your position than admit you're wrong? Margaret asked, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Victoria, we're not your enemies. We're trying to protect you, protect the company. This crusade you're on, it's going to destroy everything your father built. My father asked me to learn from his mistakes, Victoria said. That's what I'm doing. If the cost is my position, so be it. Some things are worth more than corner offices and executive authority. Marcus felt something shift in the room. Several board members were watching Victoria with new expressions. Respect, maybe, or recognition that they were witnessing something rare. A person choosing principles over position, integrity over security. May I say something? Marcus asked. The room turned to him again, and he felt the weight of their attention, their judgment, their dismissal. But he'd faced worse than corporate disapproval. He'd faced bullets and death, and the desperate weight of carrying dying men to safety. This was just words and ego, and the fragile power of people who'd forgotten what actually mattered. Nathaniel Langford saved my life, Marcus said. Not intentionally. It was an accident, really. We were fighting over who would sacrifice themselves to save the other when an IED detonated. He ended up taking shrapnel that should have killed me. And in those final minutes, while he was bleeding out in my arms, he wasn't thinking about this company. He wasn't worried about quarterly projections or market share or his legacy. He was thinking about his daughter, about the time he'd wasted, the connection he'd failed to build, the love he'd expressed through absence rather than presence. Marcus stood, needing to move, to use his body to help carry the weight of these words. You want to know what Nathaniel Langford's last words were? Not to me. To me, he gave instructions about Victoria, about the message, about the dog tag. But his actual last words, the very last thing he said before he died, were simpler. He whispered, "I'm sorry." That's it. I'm sorry. Because he understood, finally, that he'd gotten it wrong. That all of this, Marcus gestured to the boardroom, the tower, the empire visible through the windows, meant nothing compared to the relationship he'd sacrificed to build it. That's one interpretation, Richard said, but his voice had lost its edge. Or maybe he was simply expressing general regret, the kind anyone might feel when facing death. He was specific, Marcus said. He told me exactly what he was sorry for, exactly what he wanted Victoria to understand, and I watched him die with that regret, watched it consume his final moments. You want to honor Nathaniel Langford? Then honor the wisdom he gained through failure. Don't build monuments to the persona he maintained for people like you. Build something that acknowledges the truth, that he was a brilliant businessman and a failing father, and he understood which of those things actually mattered. The silence that followed felt different from before, heavier, more thoughtful. Margaret was the first to speak, her voice quiet. How do we know you're telling the truth? You could be saying anything, making up whatever story serves Victoria's narrative. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, the one Victoria had given him the previous week, showing Nathaniel holding baby Victoria with terrified new father eyes. But he'd added something to it, a military portrait of himself at 23, in uniform, recognizably the same person, but younger, harder, marked by different experiences. He placed both images on the conference table. This is me with my unit in Afghanistan 2017. That's Nathaniel Langford to my left, wearing the same dog tag Victoria now wears around her neck. We can verify the dates, cross-reference military records, confirm everything I'm telling you. But here's what you really need to understand. I have nothing to gain from lying. I'm not trying to inherit anything or claim credit for anything or leverage this story into some personal advantage. I'm simply delivering a message I promised a dying man I would deliver. Whether you believe it or accept it is your choice, but that doesn't change the truth of it. Richard picked up the photographs, studied them with narrowed eyes. Even if we accept that you were there, that you knew Nathaniel, that doesn't mean Victoria should dismantle his public legacy. There's a middle ground. Acknowledge his human struggles while still celebrating his professional achievements. That's what I'm proposing, Victoria said. I'm not erasing my father's business accomplishments. I'm adding context, creating a memorial that shows the full person, brilliant and flawed, successful and failing, human in all the complicated ways that humans are. And I'm channeling resources toward helping people avoid his mistakes. The scholarship fund will give single parents the support my father never had, never thought to create. It will say, here's what one man got wrong, and here's how we can help others get it right. The shareholders will revolt, Richard said, but his tone suggested he was grasping at arguments rather than stating convictions. This kind of negative publicity around the founder, it could tank our stock price. Or it could make us the first major company to acknowledge that success isn't one-dimensional, Margaret countered, surprising everyone, including herself. How many of us in this room have sacrificed family for career? How many have missed our children's childhoods while building professional legacies? Maybe Nathaniel's story resonates because it's uncomfortably familiar. You're saying we should support this? Richard looked at Margaret like she'd betrayed him. I'm saying maybe Victoria's onto something. Maybe honesty is better than mythology. Maybe showing vulnerability and admitting failure is stronger than pretending we're infallible. Margaret turned to Victoria. What exactly are you proposing for the memorial? Victoria pulled out her tablet, brought up designs she and Marcus had been working on. A small park in the city center. No grand statues or imposing structures. Just a quiet space with benches, trees, and a simple plaque that tells his story, both parts of it. The professional success and the personal failure. The brilliant businessman who built an empire but missed his daughter's childhood and who understood his mistake too late. And adjacent to the park, a community center that houses the scholarship program offices and offers free resources for working parents, childcare, tutoring, career counseling. She swiped through images, showed them the plans that she and Marcus had sketched out. It's modest, honest, human. It says that Nathaniel Langford was complicated, like all of us, and it channels his legacy toward helping others avoid the mistakes that haunted his final moments. The board members passed the tablet around, studying the designs in silence. Marcus watched their faces, saw resistance warring with recognition, defensiveness struggling against the uncomfortable admission that maybe Victoria was right. Maybe the mythology they'd been protecting wasn't worth protecting. Maybe truth was better than comfort. "I need to think about this," Richard said finally. "We all do. This isn't a decision to make in the heat of emotion." "Take your time," Victoria said. "But understand, I'm moving forward with or without board approval. The scholarship fund is happening. The memorial is happening. The only question is whether the company supports it or distances itself from it. I'm hoping for support, but I'll accept distance if that's what you choose." "And if we call for a vote of no confidence?" Richard's question wasn't quite a threat anymore, more like curiosity about how far Victoria was willing to go. "Then you'll have a new CEO, and I'll run the scholarship fund independently. Either way, my father's actual legacy, the wisdom he gained through failure, will be honored." The meeting ended without resolution, board members filing out in small groups, their conversations hushed and uncertain. Marcus and Victoria remained in the boardroom, watching the city through the windows, letting the silence settle. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Victoria said finally. "Sometimes they're the same thing. Did I just destroy my career?" "Maybe. Or maybe you just saved it by giving it actual meaning." Victoria laughed, exhausted and relieved. "I keep waiting to feel scared, to panic about the consequences. But all I feel is lighter. Like I've been carrying this enormous weight and finally set it down. That's what truth does, even when it costs something. Thank you for being here, for backing me up. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Your father asked me to help you understand what mattered. That doesn't end with one conversation. It's a process, and you're in the middle of it." Victoria turned from the window, her expression serious. "Can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest. Always. Am I doing this for the right reasons? Or am I just trying to ease my guilt by making my father's failure into some kind of redemption story?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Both, probably. Motives are rarely pure, but that doesn't make the action wrong. You're learning from your father's mistakes. You're trying to help others avoid the same failures. You're choosing honesty over comfortable lies. Those things matter regardless of whether your motives are perfectly selfless." "I miss him," Victoria said quietly. "I'm angry at him. I'm sad about what we never had. But I also miss him." "Is that strange?" "No, it's human. You're grieving the father you actually had and the father you wish you'd had. Both griefs are real. Both are valid. How do you do it? How do you stay so grounded when everything is complicated?" "I have Maya. She's my compass. When I'm confused about what matters or what's right, I think about what kind of man I want her to grow up respecting. That usually makes the choice clear." "Tell me about her, really tell me. Not just the basic facts, but who she is." Marcus smiled, felt the familiar warmth that always came when thinking about his daughter. "She's wise beyond her years in ways that break my heart. She worries about things 7-year-olds shouldn't worry about. Money, my well-being, whether she's being too much trouble. But she's also purely, wonderfully herself. She draws constantly, these elaborate pictures where everyone is safe and loved and nothing bad ever happens. She makes up songs that don't quite rhyme. She insists on tucking in her stuffed animals according to a very specific system that changes weekly. She's the best thing I've ever done, and I'm terrified every day that I'm not giving her enough." "She has you," Victoria said. "That's more than enough. That's everything. I'm trying to believe that. Believe it, because it's true." They left the tower together as evening settled over the city, the sky turning purple and gold. Marcus headed home while Victoria remained in the building, probably working through the implications of the board meeting, calculating costs and consequences. He didn't envy her position, but he respected her courage. Maya was waiting at the apartment window when he arrived, her face lighting up the moment she saw him on the street below. She met him at the door with a drawing, him and her, and what appeared to be a very tall building, all rendered in crayon with the earnest imperfection of child art. I drew you at work, she announced proudly. That's you fixing the building. That's me being proud of you. That's the building being happy because you take good care of it. Marcus studied the drawing seriously, giving it the attention it deserved. This is wonderful, baby girl. Can I keep it? Of course, it's for you. He added it to the refrigerator gallery, finding space among the other masterpieces. Rosa emerged from the kitchen, smiling at the domestic scene. How was your important meeting? She asked. Complicated, but necessary. The best things usually are. After Rosa left and Maya was fed and bathed, Marcus settled her onto the couch for their bedtime story ritual. But tonight, Maya had a different request. Can you tell me about when you were in the war? The true stuff, not the pretend stuff. Marcus hesitated. They'd had versions of this conversation before, but he'd always kept it vague, protecting her from realities she was too young to process. But maybe too young was a moving target. Maybe she was ready for more truth. What do you want to know? Were you scared? Yes, often. Did you have friends there? Yes, good friends, brothers really, people I trusted with my life. Did any of them die? The question landed like a punch. Marcus took a breath, chose honesty over comfort. Yes, baby, some of them died. War is like that. People get hurt. Sometimes they don't get better. Like Mommy got sick and didn't get better? Similar, but different. War is people choosing to hurt each other. Sickness is just bad luck. Both are unfair. Maya processed this, her face serious. Is that why you're sad sometimes? Because you miss your friends? Marcus pulled her closer, understanding that his daughter saw more than he'd realized. Yes, and because I wish I could have saved them. And because sometimes remembering is hard even when you know you need to remember. I think remembering is how we keep people alive, Maya said, with the unexpected wisdom children sometimes accessed. When we remember Mommy, she's still kind of here. Not really here, but here in our hearts. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. Mrs. Patterson is very smart. Do your friends live in your heart? They do. Always. Then they're not all the way gone. Just different gone. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion too large for words. This child, his daughter, saw the world with such clarity, such grace. He was supposed to be teaching her, but more often than not, she was teaching him. You're right, baby girl. You're absolutely right. The weekend brought unexpected news. The board had reached a decision faster than anyone anticipated. Victoria called Marcus on Saturday morning, her voice carrying excitement he'd never heard from her before. They approved it, all of it, the memorial, the scholarship fund, everything. Margaret led a coalition of board members who convinced Richard that honesty was better than mythology. We're moving forward. That's incredible. Congratulations. There's more. I want you to be on the scholarship selection committee. You understand what single parents need, what would actually make a difference. I need that perspective. Marcus was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of the offer. Victoria, I'm not qualified for that kind of position. I don't have the education or the... You have lived experience. You have integrity. You have insight into what matters. That's more qualification than any degree could provide. Please, say yes. Can I think about it? Of course. But Marcus, you've already changed everything. Don't stop now. He spent the weekend considering the offer, talking it through with Rosa, watching Maya play with the uncomplicated joy of someone who didn't yet understand how rare it was to be offered opportunities that could change trajectories. By Monday morning, he'd made his decision. The text he sent to Victoria was simple. Yes, I'll do it. Her response came immediately. Thank you. Come by my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll discuss details. Tuesday morning found Marcus in Victoria's executive suite for the first time as something other than the cleaning crew. The space was less intimidating in daylight, more human somehow. Victoria had added personal touches since he'd last seen it, photographs of her as a child, the journal entries from her father, the dog tag displayed in a simple frame on her desk. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said, gesturing for him to sit. The scholarship committee will meet monthly. We'll review applications, select recipients, monitor their progress. It's going to change lives, Marcus. Real, tangible change for people who are fighting the same battles you've fought. I'm honored to be part of it. There's something else. Victoria pulled out a folder, passed it across the desk. I've been thinking about your situation. About Maya. She's 7 now, which means middle school is only a few years away, then high school, then college. And I know how expensive raising a child is, especially for a single parent. Marcus opened the folder, found financial documents he didn't immediately understand. Victoria leaned forward. I'm establishing an education trust for Maya. Full funding for any school she wants to attend, from middle school through whatever graduate program she chooses. It's irrevocable. She'll have access to it regardless of what happens with you, me, the company, or anything else. Marcus's hands were shaking. Victoria, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. Your daughter deserves opportunities, Marcus. She deserves not to worry about whether her health needs are a burden. She deserves to dream big without calculating whether those dreams are financially feasible. This isn't charity, it's investment. Investment in a brilliant child who's going to do extraordinary things if we give her the chance. Why? Why would you do this? Victoria's eyes were bright with emotion. Because my father would have wanted me to. Because you delivered a message that changed my life. Because Maya deserves what I had, financial security and educational opportunity. And because unlike my situation, she already has the most important thing. She has a father who shows up, who's present, who loves her enough to work impossible hours and sacrifice his own needs for hers. She has what I never had, Marcus. This just evens out the rest. Marcus couldn't speak. He sat there holding the folder, understanding that this single act of generosity had just transformed his daughter's entire future. Maya could go to the best schools, could pursue any passion without worrying about cost, could become anything she dreamed without the constraints of poverty limiting her options. I don't know how to thank you, he finally managed. Then don't. Just keep being the father you are. Keep showing up for her. That's all the thanks I need. The weeks that followed settled into new rhythms. Marcus's work on the day crew became routine, his role on the scholarship committee meaningful and engaging. He attended Maya's school events, helped with homework, cooked dinner every night, and felt pieces of himself that had been dormant for years coming back to life. The education trust sat in the back of his mind like a promise. Maya's future secured, her dreams possible, her potential unlimited. Victoria underwent her own transformation. The Ice Queen CEO thawed into someone more human, more accessible. She started eating lunch in the company cafeteria instead of her office, learning names of employees she'd previously ignored, asking questions about their lives with genuine interest. Some people found it unsettling, others found it refreshing. Everyone agreed she'd changed. The memorial park broke ground in October, almost exactly 8 years after Nathaniel Langford had died in Marcus's arms. The ceremony was small and intimate. No television cameras, no grand speeches, just a gathering of people who'd known Nathaniel or been touched by his story. Victoria spoke briefly, her words honest and painful and beautiful. My father built an empire, she said, standing on the future site of a park that would bear his name and his truth. But he failed at the things that mattered most. He missed my childhood while building financial security. He worked himself to exhaustion, avoiding the hard work of actual parenting. And in his final moments, he understood his mistakes. He saw clearly what he'd gotten wrong, and he asked that his daughter learn from his failures rather than celebrate his successes. She paused, looked at the small crowd gathered in the autumn sunlight. This park will tell that story. Not the sanitized version, but the true one. Because we don't honor people by pretending they were perfect. We honor them by acknowledging their full humanity, their achievements and their failures, their strengths and their weaknesses, their wisdom and their wounds. My father was complicated, like all of us. And his final gift to me was the truth about what matters. Presence over position, connection over achievement. Showing up for the people you love while you still can. Marcus stood at the edge of the gathering, Maya beside him, her hand secure in his. She'd insisted on coming, had drawn a picture for the ceremony, Nathaniel and Victoria together, finally, in the kind of embrace they'd never managed in life but might achieve in memory and reconciliation. After the ceremony, Victoria approached them. She knelt in front of Maya, meeting her at eye level. You must be Maya. Your father talks about you constantly. Maya studied Victoria with the serious assessment children brought to important adults. Are you the lady who helped my daddy? Actually, your daddy helped me. He taught me some very important things. Like what? Like how to be honest even when it's hard. Like how showing up matters more than being impressive. Like how the best legacy isn't what you build, but who you are when nobody's watching. Victoria glanced at Marcus. Your father is a remarkable man, Maya. You're very lucky. I know, Maya said simply. He's my hero. Victoria stood, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He's mine too. The months that followed brought continued transformation. The scholarship fund launched with significant media attention, but not the kind Victoria had feared. Instead of criticism, they received applications, hundreds, then thousands, from single parents working impossible jobs while trying to finish degrees and raise children. Each application was a story of sacrifice and determination, and Marcus read them all with growing understanding of how common his struggle had been. How many people were fighting the same battle with different details. The selection committee, Marcus, Victoria, and 3 other members with diverse backgrounds, met monthly to review applications and select recipients. The first cohort included a single mother working overnight security while studying nursing, a widowed father balancing construction work with a teaching certification program, a divorced parent who'd put education on hold for 10 years while raising 3 children. Each recipient received tuition coverage, stipends for childcare and living expenses, and mentorship support. Marcus watched them receive their notification letters, saw their disbelief transform into joy and relief and desperate gratitude. This was what Nathaniel's legacy had become. Not a statue in a park, but changed lives, possible futures, doors opening for people who'd been locked out by circumstance rather than capability. Christmas came with snow and celebration. Marcus hosted a small gathering at his apartment. Rosa, Maya, and surprisingly, Victoria, who'd accepted the invitation with shy uncertainty. They ate homemade tamales that Rosa had spent days preparing, exchanged modest gifts, and laughed at Maya's elaborate retelling of her school's holiday pageant. Thank you for including me, Victoria said as the evening wound down, helping Marcus clean up while Rosa read to Maya in the other room. I haven't had a real Christmas in years, just formal obligations and expensive gifts that meant nothing. You're always welcome here, Marcus said simply. You're family now. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I've never had family. Not really. My father was too absent. My mother died too young. I've been alone my entire adult life, and now you're not alone, Marcus finished. Now you have people who see you, who know you, who care about you not because of your position or your money, but because of who you actually are. How did you do it? How did you take my entire worldview and flip it upside down in a matter of weeks? I told you the truth, that's all. You did the hard part. You listened. You let it change you. Not everyone has that courage. Maya appeared in the doorway, sleepy and warm from Rosa's lap. Daddy, can Victoria see my room? I want to show her my drawings. If Victoria wants to, Marcus said. I'd love to, Victoria said immediately. Marcus watched his daughter take Victoria's hand, lead her down the narrow hallway to the small bedroom that Maya had decorated with her own particular aesthetic. Drawings everywhere, stuffed animals arranged just so, books stacked in careful categories. He heard Maya's voice explaining her organization system, heard Victoria's genuine interest, heard laughter floating back to where he stood. This was what healing looked like. Not dramatic or instant, but gradual and human. Victoria learning to connect. Maya learning that trust could extend beyond the tight circle of people who'd proven themselves. All of them learning that family wasn't just biology or legal designation, but the people who showed up, who stayed, who chose each other day after day. In February, the memorial park officially opened. The ceremony was larger this time. Media coverage, city officials, a crowd of people who'd been following the story and wanted to witness this unusual monument to honest failure. The park was beautiful in its simplicity, trees bare against winter sky, benches positioned for quiet contemplation, and in the center, a bronze plaque that told Nathaniel Langford's true story without flinching from uncomfortable truth. Marcus stood with Maya and Victoria, reading the words they'd crafted together. Nathaniel Langford built a business empire but missed his daughter's childhood. He achieved professional success but failed at the things that mattered most. In his final moments, he understood these failures with painful clarity. He asked that his story serve as a lesson rather than a legend. This park honors his wish. May we all learn what he learned too late, that showing up for the people we love is the only achievement that endures. Below the main text, a second section read, "Adjacent to this park, the Nathaniel Langford Second Chances Fund provides educational support for single parents pursuing degrees while raising children. This living legacy transforms failure into wisdom, regret into redemption, and one man's mistakes into opportunities for thousands. Apply at langfordfund.org." Victoria stepped forward to speak, but her prepared remarks remained in her pocket. Instead, she spoke from the heart. 8 years ago, my father died in a desert half a world away. I mourned the man I thought he was, the brilliant CEO, the devoted father, the larger-than-life figure who'd built something extraordinary. But that man never existed. He was a fiction I needed to believe because the truth was too painful. The real Nathaniel Langford was complicated, flawed. Human in all the ways we're uncomfortable admitting humans are. He loved me, but didn't know how to show it. He provided for me, but was never present. He built me an empire, but missed my childhood. Her voice was steady despite the emotion beneath it. For years, I followed his example without realizing it. I measured worth in profits and positions. I treated people as either useful or invisible. I built walls to protect myself from connection because connection was scary and unpredictable and couldn't be controlled. I became my father's daughter in all the wrong ways. She looked at Marcus, standing at the edge of the crowd with Maya's hand in his. Then someone told me the truth. Not the comfortable version I wanted to hear, but the hard truth I needed. That my father understood his failures at the end. That he'd sent me a message about what actually mattered. That I was perpetuating his mistakes instead of learning from them. And that truth changed everything. Victoria turned back to the crowd. This park isn't a celebration. It's an acknowledgement, an admission that we get things wrong, that success in one area doesn't compensate for failure in another, that what we think matters often doesn't matter at all. My father learned this lesson when it was too late to fix his mistakes. But it's not too late for the rest of us. We can show up for our children. We can value people for their humanity rather than their utility. We can choose presence over position, connection over achievement, truth over comfortable lies. That's the legacy worth building. That's what this park represents. The crowd was silent, absorbing words that challenged every comfortable assumption about success and legacy, and what it meant to live a life that mattered. Then slowly, applause began. Not the polite corporate kind, but genuine and moved and thoughtful. After the ceremony, people approached Marcus, wanting to thank him for his role in creating something so honest. He deflected the attention, uncomfortable with praise, wanting to return to his comfortable invisibility. But Maya had other ideas. "My daddy is a hero," she announced to anyone who would listen. "He tells the truth even when it's hard. He keeps his promises, and he's the best father in the whole world." Victoria overheard this, smiled at Marcus's embarrassment. "She's not wrong, you know. She's biased. She's perceptive. There's a difference." The Scholarship Fund's first annual report came out in March, documenting the program's impact. 47 single parents enrolled in degree programs, 23 children receiving consistent childcare while their parents attended classes, 15 families reporting reduced financial stress and improved well-being. The numbers told one story. The testimonials told another. "I was working 3 jobs and failing out of school," wrote one recipient, a single mother of 2, studying to be a teacher. "This scholarship gave me time. Actual time to study, to be with my kids, to breathe. I'm passing my classes now. My children see me at dinner instead of just on weekends. I'm becoming the person I always wanted to be. Thank you for seeing people like me. Thank you for understanding that potential doesn't disappear just because circumstances are hard." Marcus read every testimonial, felt the weight of lives changed, futures opened, children who would grow up with present parents instead of exhausted ghosts. This was Nathaniel's real legacy, not the tower that bore his name, but the opportunities created from his failure's wisdom. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days. Marcus's life had settled into rhythms that felt sustainable. Work that mattered, time with Maya, committee meetings where he helped select scholarship recipients, occasional dinners with Victoria where they talked about everything and nothing. He'd even started dating tentatively, meeting a woman named Sarah through Rosa's church, who was kind and patient with his complicated situation. Maya was thriving. Her grades were excellent, her drawings more elaborate, her confidence growing as she realized her future held possibilities she'd never imagined. The education trust sat in the background of their lives like a promise kept, a door opened, a future secured. One evening in April, Maya approached Marcus with unusual seriousness. "Daddy, I need to ask you something important." "Okay, baby girl, what is it?" "Can Victoria be my aunt, like, officially?" Marcus smiled. "I don't think there's an official way to make someone your aunt if they're not related by blood or marriage." "But we could choose her, right? Like you and Rosa and Mrs. Patterson say, families are people who choose each other. Can we choose Victoria to be my aunt?" "I think Victoria would be honored by that. But maybe you should ask her yourself." The following Saturday, Victoria came to their apartment for the dinner that had become a monthly tradition. Maya waited until dessert, then made her proposal with the gravity of someone negotiating important terms. "Victoria, I want you to be my aunt, not pretend aunt, but real aunt. The kind who comes to school things and helps with projects and is just always there. Will you be that?" Victoria's composure crumbled. She cried openly, not caring how she looked, reaching across the table to take Maya's hands. "Yes, yes, I will be that. I would be so honored to be your aunt." "Good," Maya said, satisfied. "Because family should be people who show up, and you show up." Marcus watched the exchange, felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for years. This was home. Not the apartment, or the job, or the financial security, but these people, these connections, this chosen family built on truth and presence, and the courage to be vulnerable. That night, after Maya was asleep and Victoria was preparing to leave, she paused at the door. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have said months ago." "What?" "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was treating you like you were invisible. Thank you for keeping your promise to my father, even when it meant watching me struggle. Thank you for telling me the truth even when it hurt. Thank you for showing me what integrity looks like. Thank you for including me in your life, in Maya's life, in this family you've built. Thank you for being exactly who you are. You don't need to thank me for any of that." "Yes, I do. Because you changed my life, Marcus. You showed me that the way I was living, the walls I'd built, the distance I maintained, the coldness I wore like armor, that wasn't strength. It was fear. And you gave me the courage to be afraid and do it anyway, to tear down the walls, to be vulnerable, to show up. That's an extraordinary gift. You did the hard part. You chose to change. That took more courage than anything I did." "We helped each other," Victoria said. "That's what family does." After she left, Marcus checked on Maya one last time before going to bed. She was sprawled across her mattress in the boneless way children slept, her latest drawing tacked to the wall above her head. This one showed 5 people holding hands: Marcus, Maya, Rosa, Victoria, and a woman Maya had labeled Sarah with a question mark. His daughter was drawing their expanded family into existence, making space for love in all its complicated forms. Marcus kissed her forehead, whispered the ritual words. "To the moon and back, baby girl." In her sleep, Maya smiled. The months became years. The scholarship fund grew, helping hundreds of single parents pursue education while raising children. The memorial park became a destination for people seeking quiet contemplation, drawn by the unusual honesty of its message. Victoria continued leading the company, but with different priorities, different values, different ways of measuring success. Marcus remained on the day crew and the scholarship committee, finding satisfaction in work that mattered and connections that sustained him. Maya grew, as children do. 2nd grade became 3rd, became 4th. Her drawings evolved in sophistication, but never lost their essential optimism. Her vision of a world where people chose kindness, where family was defined by presence rather than biology, where showing up was the highest achievement, She talked about becoming a teacher, an artist, a writer, her dreams expanding to fill the space that financial security had opened. On the 8th anniversary of Nathaniel's death, Marcus and Victoria returned to the memorial park. They did this every year, a private ritual of remembrance and gratitude. They sat on the bench facing the plaque, not speaking, letting the truth of those words settle over them again. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Victoria asked eventually, "of what we built from his failure?" "I think he'd be amazed," Marcus said, "and humbled and grateful. He gave you a message hoping it would help you avoid his mistakes. He didn't imagine it would transform into something that helped thousands of people. That's the magic of truth. It multiplies. It spreads. It changes not just one life, but entire communities." I wish I could tell him. Wish I could show him what came from those final words. Maybe you can. Maybe that's what living well means, honoring the wisdom of people who loved us by becoming the people they hoped we'd be. Victoria leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that had taken years to develop. "You're my brother, you know. Not by blood, but by choice. By showing up. By being there. That's what family is." "I know. You're Maya's aunt, my friend, my family, all of it." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon faded into evening, the city sounds distant and muted, the memorial park holding space for truth and failure and redemption. This was Nathaniel Langford's legacy. Not the empire he'd built or the money he'd accumulated, but the wisdom he'd gained through failure and passed along through a promise kept by a man who understood what it meant to show up. Somewhere across the city, Maya was at home with Rosa, probably drawing, definitely safe, absolutely certain that her father would return because he always did. That certainty, that security of presence, was worth more than any monument or memorial or public recognition. It was the currency that actually mattered, the legacy that endured, the achievement that counted. Marcus had learned this from Nathaniel. Victoria had learned it from Marcus. Maya was learning it from all of them. And somewhere, a single parent receiving a scholarship was learning it too, that showing up mattered, that presence was power, that the most important work happened not in boardrooms or corner offices, but in kitchens and homework sessions and bedtime rituals. The truth Nathaniel had delivered with his dying breath had multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined. It lived in the scholarship fund and the memorial park and the changed lives and the chosen families. It lived in Victoria's transformation and Marcus's courage and Maya's certainty that love looked like presence. It lived in the simple, profound understanding that respect was indeed a quiet language, spoken not in grand gestures or impressive achievements, but in the daily choice to see people, to value them, to show up for them while you still could. And in the end, that was the only monument that mattered, the only legacy worth building, the only truth worth dying to deliver and living to honor.